The water is cold here, not the cold of a swimming pool or a winter lake, but something older and more absolute, a cold that has no memory of warmth, that has never been interrupted by sunlight reaching deep enough to matter. You are sinking, slowly, without effort. The surface above you is a pale shimmer that grows smaller with each breath you release, each bubble spiraling upward like a question you no longer need answered. This is not the ocean you know. There are no fish. There are no whales singing somewhere beyond hearing. There is no distant hum of a cargo ship, no plastic caught in a gyre, no chemical taste of the modern world bleeding into ancient water. This ocean is 480 million years old, and it has never once heard a sound louder than water moving through water. It has never known the silence of things interrupted. It is simply itself, vast, cold, and unhurried. You descend. The light shifts from pale green to grey, to something that is almost the colour of sleep itself. The pressure builds around you like a gentle hand cupped around a flame, steady and even and warm in its own way. Your body understands this. Some part of you, the part that is older than language, the part that carries the memory of the ocean in every cell, recognises this place. It does not panic, it simply grows still. Below you, slowly coming into definition the way a dream becomes real in the first seconds after waking, the seafloor appears. It is not bare. It is not silent in the way that emptiness is silent. There is life here, extraordinary, alien, intricate life, and it goes about its ancient business with a patience that makes the whole of human history feel like a single held breath. You settle. The sediment does not rise to meet you. The creatures around you do not flee. You're simply a new thing in an old place, and the Ordovician sea accepts you without ceremony, without judgment, without any interest at all. This is the oldest gift the ocean has ever given. It does not require you to be anything other than present. It only asks that you breathe slowly and let it show you what the world once was. The Ordovician period began approximately 485 million years ago and lasted for nearly 45 million years. Those numbers, taken together, represent a span of time so immense that the mind cannot truly hold them. The entire existence of our species, every fire ever lit, every city ever built, every song ever sung, would fit inside that interval so many times over that the comparison becomes almost meaningless. The Ordovician does not ask to be understood in human terms. It simply was, and what it was is one of the most extraordinary chapters in the long story of this planet. You are here now, in the middle of that story. The year, if one were to assign a number to it, is somewhere around 460 million years before the present. The continents do not look the way they do in any map you have ever studied. The familiar shapes, the boot of Italy, the belly of South America, the long diagonal of India, none of those exist yet. The land masses of this world are strange and scattered and would be unrecognizable to anyone trained on modern geography. Gondwana is the great southern supercontinent, enormous and ancient, and it drifts slowly toward the pole. Laurentia, the core of what will eventually become North America, sits near the equator, its edges warmed by shallow tropical seas. But you are not on land. There is almost nothing on land to speak of, not yet. The continents are bare rock and thin mineral soil, interrupted by occasional patches of primitive moss-like organisms hugging the wettest margins of the shore. There are no trees, there are no insects, there are no crawling things or running things or things that call to one another across a landscape. The land, for all its great silence, is almost beside the point. The story of the Ordovician happens here, in the water, beneath your slowly drifting body, on the seafloor and in the columns of light that reach down from a sun that is already ancient. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric stories like this, please consider subscribing. New stories arrive every week, and there is always something waiting for you when you return. The oceans of the Ordovician cover most of the planet's surface. They are warm in places and cold in places, shallow on the wide continental shelves and impossibly deep in the basins between. They carry dissolved minerals from the slow erosion of the young continents, and those minerals feed the creatures below. The chemistry of this water is different from the chemistry of modern seawater. The ratios of calcium and magnesium, the concentration of sulfates and carbonates, all of it tuned to a slightly different frequency. But the fundamental fact of it is the same. It is salt water. It is sunlit near the surface and dark below. It is full of life in ways that would astonish any observer who expected the early Earth to be simple. The Ordovician is sometimes called the Great Biodiversification Event, though that phrase does not quite capture what it means to float above a Ordovician reef and see the sheer improbable variety of what evolution had already managed to produce. The Cambrian explosion, which preceded this period by some 30 million years, had introduced the basic body plans of almost all animal life that would follow. The Ordovician refined and multiplied those plans, filling ecological niches that had been left open, elaborating on structures that had only been sketched in, producing a world of such intricate biological complexity that it would not be surpassed in terms of raw marine diversity for many millions of years. You are here to see it, not as a scientist with instruments and sampling equipment, not as a tourist with a camera. You are here the way sleep sometimes carries you into old dreams, present, weightless, observant, and unhurried. The ocean holds you. The current is slow. The light above is diffuse and even and does not ask anything of your eyes. Let your shoulders settle. Let your hands open. There is nowhere to go and nothing to find. It is already here, all around you, and it has been waiting 460 million years for something capable of noticing it. The seafloor beneath you is not flat. It is not a featureless plain of grey mud extending to the horizon in every direction. That is the seafloor of certain deep abyssal regions, and even those are more complex than most people imagine. But here, in the warm shallows of an Ordovician continental shelf, the bottom is a landscape, a genuine, intricate, three-dimensional landscape, built not from rock and soil and the roots of trees, but from the calcium carbonate skeletons of organisms that have lived and died in this place over millions of generations. It rises in places, this landscape. It has ridges and hollows, overhangs and sheltered corners, columns that reach upward and branching structures that spread horizontally like the canopies of trees in a forest. But there are no trees here, and there never have been. The structures that create this landscape are made of living things and the remnants of living things, and the distinction between the architecture and the architect is, in this place, almost entirely philosophical. The dominant builders of the Ordovician seafloor are the Bryozoans. You have perhaps never heard of them, or perhaps you have encountered their descendants in a tide pool without realizing what you were looking at. They are colonial organisms, creatures that live in clusters of individuals called zooids, each one small enough to pass through the eye of a needle, but capable, in their thousands and millions, of constructing structures of astonishing size and complexity. A single Bryozoan colony can take the form of a lace-like fan spread against the current, or a branching tree of calcium carbonate reaching upward through the water column, or a thick encrusting sheet spread across the surface of a rock like a living carpet. You drift closer to one of these colonies now. It rises from the sediment at an angle, its branches dividing and subdividing in a pattern that is regular without being mechanical, the way a snowflake is regular, built according to rules, but shaped by circumstance into something unique. Each tiny pore along the surface of this structure is the opening of a zooid's chamber. Each zooid within its chamber extends a crown of delicate tentacles into the water, and those tentacles move in a rhythm that is almost imperceptibly slow, sweeping microscopic particles of food toward the central opening of the animal's body. They are feeding. They are always feeding. In the Ordovician Ocean, the water is rich with suspended organic material, fragments of decaying organisms, bacterial cells, microscopic algae drifting in the current. To a human eye, the water looks clear, almost empty. But to a Bryozoan, it is thick with nutrition, a constant gentle rain of food arriving from above, and all that is required to survive is to be present with open tentacles and enough patience to intercept what drifts past. Around the Bryozoan colony, other structures emerge from the sediment. There are brachiopods here, creatures that superficially resemble clams but are fundamentally different in their internal anatomy and their evolutionary history. A brachiopod has two shells hinged together, but the shells open not to the sides as a clam's do but to the front and back, and inside the shell there is a coiled organ called a lopophore, covered in cilia that beat constantly to draw water and food particles into the animal's body. In the Ordovician, brachiopods are perhaps the most successful animals in the sea. They will be found in fossil beds on every continent, in strata laid down over tens of millions of years, a testament to the extraordinary effectiveness of their basic body plan. The species around you now are not the giants of their kind, but they are beautiful in the way that small, precise things are beautiful. Their shells are ribbed, some of them, with fine parallel lines that run from hinge to margin and catch the light in a way that makes the animal seem to shimmer slightly as the water moves around it. Others are smooth, their surfaces polished by the constant gentle abrasion of the current, and these lie half buried in the sediment with only their anterior margins exposed, filtering the water that passes over them with a patience that makes the concept of waiting seem almost meaningless. Consider what it means to wait if you have no awareness of time passing. The Brachiopod does not experience the hours as hours. It does not feel the afternoon wearing toward evening or the slow approach of night. It simply is, in this moment and the next moment and the moment after that, drawing the ocean through its body and extracting what it needs and releasing the rest. There is something in this that is deeply restful to contemplate. The animal does not resist the water that surrounds it. It does not struggle against the current or seek to alter the chemistry of the sea to suit its preferences. It opens itself to what is available, and it lives on exactly that. Further along the seafloor you encounter the crinoids. These are perhaps the most otherworldly of all the Ordovician invertebrates, and that is saying something in a world full of creatures that have no modern equivalent. A crinoid is an echinoderm, a relative, however distant, of the sea stars and sea urchins that still populate modern oceans. But a crinoid grows upward on a long stalk of stacked calcium carbonate discs, and at the top of this stalk spreads a crown of feathery arms that extend outward and upward into the water column, like the petals of a flower that has decided to become an animal. The comparison to flowers is not merely poetic. The crinoid's arms are held in an arrangement that maximizes their exposure to the current, and each arm is lined with smaller structures called pinnules, which are in turn covered with tube feet that capture food particles drifting past. The whole apparatus functions as a passive feeding net, but a net of such extraordinary biological sophistication that it has persisted, in one form or another, from this moment 460 million years ago into the present day. Living crinoids still exist in modern oceans, and when you encounter one, you're looking at a body plan so successful, so perfectly calibrated to its purpose, that the universe has seen no compelling reason to replace it in nearly 500 million years. The crinoid forest around you now is dense. The stalks rise from the sediment in their hundreds, perhaps their thousands, each topped with its crown of waving arms, and the overall effect is of standing in a meadow of strange flowers in a wind that moves everything in the same slow rhythm. The stems of the crinoids are not rigid. They flex slightly in the current, and this flexibility means that the whole forest moves together, a coordinated swaying that is not the product of any coordination at all, but simply the physical response of many similar structures to the same force applied from the same direction. You watch this for a while. There is no hurry. The crinoids do not know you are here, and if they did, it would make no difference to their behavior. They are not afraid. They are not curious. They are simply doing what they have always done, what they will do for the next 300 million years without any fundamental change, and watching them is like watching a process so patient and so ancient that the word ancient stops meaning anything useful and becomes instead just a sound that tries to gesture towards something too large for language. The sediment itself is alive in ways that are easy to overlook. If you were to press your hand gently into the grey-brown material that covers the seafloor between the crinoid stalks and the Brachiopod beds, you would feel it yield like very wet sand, and in that yielding you might glimpse briefly the network of burrows and tunnels that runs through it just beneath the surface. Worms live here, creatures without common names in most languages, soft-bodied and largely invisible, processing the sediment through their bodies and aerating it with their passage the way earthworms will one day aerate the soil of continents that do not yet exist. This bioturbation, the churning of the sediment by living organisms, is one of the most important ecological processes in the Ordovician Ocean, and it happens mostly in silence and in the dark of the substrate, invisible to anything that is not small enough to live inside it. The worms and the burrowing organisms that share their world are creating the conditions that allow other creatures to survive, cycling nutrients from the depths of the sediment back into the water column, maintaining the chemical gradient that makes the seafloor a place where life can flourish rather than stagnate. Somewhere beneath you, in the darkness below the seafloor surface, something moves. You cannot see it. It is a trilobite burrowing through the sediment in search of organic matter to consume, its body armoured and segmented, its compound eyes closed against the darkness since there is no light to detect. It moves slowly, methodically, pushing through the sediment with a persistence that is not determination. It does not have the neural complexity for determination, but is simply the mechanical expression of an organism following the chemical gradients that lead toward food. It will find what it needs, it always does. The seafloor settles around you. The crinoids wave. The Bryozoan colonies extend their tentacles into water that holds more nutrition than your eye can detect. The brachiopods filter and sort and discard. The sediment breathes with the invisible activity of its hidden residents, and you float above all of it, weightless and unhurried, watching the Ordovician go about its business with the calm authority of something that has had 460 million years to get things exactly right. Let yourself drift a little. Let the current carry you slowly along the contours of the seafloor. There is more to see, and none of it will be rushed, and none of it requires anything of you except the willingness to be present in a place and a time that is older than any story you have ever been told. There is a peculiar quality to the light at this depth that is worth dwelling on. It does not arrive from any fixed point. The sun above the surface is directional. It rises and sets. It moves across the sky in its daily arc. But by the time its light has travelled through even a few meters of seawater, it has been scattered so thoroughly by the water molecules and the suspended particles and the countless small organisms in the water column that it seems to come from everywhere at once. The seafloor is illuminated not by a sun but by a general luminosity, a brightening of the water itself that has no single source and no single direction. This even illumination creates a world without strong shadows. In the world above water, shadows are information. They tell you about the position of the light source. They reveal the three-dimensional structure of objects. They mark the passage of time as the sun moves across the sky, and the shadows lengthen and shorten. Here, with the light coming from all directions simultaneously, the shadows are soft at best and absent at worst. The reading of space that you do automatically with the help of shadow has to be replaced by other cues: texture, colour, movement, the subtle variations in the quality of the diffuse light as it catches surfaces at different angles. The organisms that live here have evolved in this shadowless world. The compound eyes of the trilobite are designed not to detect shadow boundaries, but to detect movement. The flicker of something moving against the bright background of the water column above, the slight darkening that indicates another organism passing between the trilobite's eye and the diffuse light of the surface. The trilobite's world is a world of relative brightness and relative motion, and the information available in that world is sufficient for the life it leads. You drift a little closer to the seafloor and hover above it, watching the brachiopods from a distance of about 1/2 metre. At this distance, the detail of their shells is visible. The fine ribbing that runs from the hinge to the margin, the tiny setae that fringe the shell opening where the lophophore inside generates its water current, the way the two valves move slightly in relation to each other as the animal completes its rhythmic breath of seawater. The movement is so small that it takes several minutes to notice it. The valves open a fraction of a millimetre, hold, close a fraction of a millimetre, hold, open, hold, close, hold. The rhythm of the brachiopod is very slow and very even and has been going on without interruption since this particular individual settled on this particular patch of seafloor, however many years or decades ago. How long does a brachiopod live? The question is one that paleontologists have worked to answer from growth lines in fossil shells, and the answer depends on the species and the conditions, but some brachiopod species are known to reach ages of decades. In the productivity of the Ordovician shelf, where food is abundant and predation, while present, is not so intense as to prevent many individuals from reaching old age, this particular animal may be quite old by brachiopod standards. It has been filtering the water of this shelf for years, perhaps for decades, adding its small contributions to the growing accumulation of material below it, processing the microscopic food of the ocean through its lophophore with the same patient efficiency it has always displayed. The sediment immediately below the brachiopod bed is different from the sediment in the more open areas of the shelf. It is darker, slightly organic, richer in the fine particles of calcium carbonate that fall from the shells above. The difference in sediment composition creates a slightly different habitat for the organisms that live within it, a slightly different chemistry, a slightly different texture, different opportunities for the worms and small crustaceans and juvenile organisms that inhabit the substrate. The brachiopods are not only filtering the water above them, they are modifying the environment below them, creating conditions that differ from the conditions that would prevail without their presence. This is what ecosystems do. They do not passively occupy environments, they modify them, and the modifications create new opportunities that other organisms exploit, and the exploitation creates further modifications in a chain of mutual causation and consequence that builds, over geological time, the extraordinary complexity you are currently floating above. The Ordovician seafloor is not a place where organisms exist despite their environment. It is a place where organisms and environment have shaped each other so completely over so long a time that the distinction between the two has become almost philosophical. Something moves along the seafloor ahead of you. It is not large, perhaps the length of your hand from the tip of your middle finger to the heel of your palm, but it moves with a deliberate, measured quality that distinguishes it immediately from the passive filtering creatures around it. It is going somewhere. It has a direction. And watching it pick its way across the rippled sediment, its many legs working in a coordinated wave beneath the dome of its shell, you understand for the first time what it means to encounter an animal rather than a colony or a fixed organism. This creature has somewhere to be. It is a trilobite. The name comes from the three-lobed structure of its body, a central axial lobe running lengthwise from head to tail, flanked on either side by a pleural lobe that carries the legs and gills, and that name will attach itself to this entire group of organisms for as long as humans study paleontology. Trilobites first appeared in the Cambrian some 40 million years before the moment you currently inhabit, and they will persist until the Great Permian extinction approximately 250 million years from now. In terms of geological longevity, they are among the most successful complex animals that have ever lived, and the Ordovician is, in many ways, their golden age. The one you're watching now belongs to a genus that is common in these warm shelf waters. Its shell, more properly called an exoskeleton or cuticle, is a warm reddish-brown in colour, though colour is a somewhat misleading concept when applied to an animal that exists only in fossil form and whose original pigmentation is entirely unknown. What you see is your mind's best guess, shaped by the quality of the light that filters down from above and the way it falls across the calcified ridges and grooves of the animal's dorsal surface. Perhaps it was this colour. Perhaps it was pale cream or dark grey or mottled in patterns that had nothing to do with aesthetics and everything to do with camouflage against a seafloor that looked much like this one. The trilobite pauses. It has sensed something, or perhaps it has only stopped to process the chemical information arriving from the sediment surface in front of it. Its antennae, thin as threads, sweep forward and back in small, careful arcs, sampling the water, reading the molecular language of the ocean floor. Trilobites are believed to have been omnivores in most cases. They ate what was available: organic detritus, soft-bodied worms, the occasional smaller invertebrate that could not escape quickly enough. They were not the apex predators of their world, but they were not entirely without options either, and in an ecosystem as productive as this Ordovician shelf, options were abundant. What is most remarkable about the trilobite as you watch it, though, is not its feeding behaviour or its mobility, or even the intricate segmentation of its body. It is the eyes. The trilobite has compound eyes, faceted lenses made of calcite, calcium carbonate, the same material as its shell, arranged in a convex array on the sides of its cephalon, its head. These eyes can detect movement, can perceive light and dark, can perhaps resolve objects in a crude but functional way. And they are, in this ocean, among the most sophisticated visual organs in existence. Nothing here sees better. Nothing here processes the incoming light into information more rapidly or more usefully. Consider what it means to be the best-sighted creature in a world that has not yet invented sophisticated vision. The trilobite moves through the Ordovician ocean with a perceptual advantage that no other complex animal has yet evolved to match, and it has held this advantage for tens of millions of years without any significant competition. The eyes that scan the seafloor ahead of it are not seeing very much by human standards. Probably not colour, Probably not fine detail, probably not the subtle gradations of form and texture that your own visual system processes automatically and effortlessly. But they are seeing movement. They are seeing the shadow of a falling object. They are seeing the slight disturbance in the sediment that indicates something buried nearby. In this world, that is enough. There is something quietly extraordinary about sitting with this understanding, that the best eyes in the ocean belong to an animal the size of your hand, picking through the sediment of a seafloor that has never heard a human voice. The whole long history of vision, from these calcite lenses to the cameras that orbit the planet in the present day, passes through this moment without the trilobite being aware of it. It sees what it sees. It goes where it goes. The future is not something it needs to worry about. Other trilobites become visible as your eyes adjust to the seafloor landscape. They are not together in any social sense. Trilobites do not school or flock or organize themselves into cooperative groups in the way that some later animals will. But they occupy the same productive habitat for the same reasons, and in a rich environment like this, multiple individuals of the same species might be found within a short distance of one another, simply because the food that sustains them is here, and they are following it. They move in loose, independent trajectories, each one a small engine of chemical detection and mechanical response, processing the information of the seafloor in the only way available to them. One of them has enrolled. You almost missed it. The movement was slow and deliberate, the animal folding itself inward along its transverse axis, the cephalon tucking down and the pygidium, the tail shield, curving up and over to meet it. The result is a tight sphere of calcite, essentially sealed against external threats, with no soft tissue exposed. This is the defensive behavior that trilobites had perfected by the Ordovician, and it is extraordinarily effective. A predator that encounters a bald trilobite is faced with an object that offers no purchase for a mouth or claw, no vulnerable surface to attack. The animal inside simply waits, safe in its mineral shell, until the threat passes and it can unfurl and continue on its way. What triggered this enrollment? You look around but see nothing obviously threatening. Perhaps it was a shadow, some larger organism passing between the trilobite and the filtered light above. Perhaps it was a chemical signal in the water, the dissolved signature of something predatory that your senses cannot detect, but that the trilobite's antennae registered immediately as a warning. The ocean is full of information that human senses cannot access, and in the Ordovician, with no years of accumulated human knowledge to tell you what to be afraid of, you are navigating on less information than any of the creatures around you. The thought is not frightening, it is simply clarifying. You are a visitor here, incompletely equipped, relying on a kind of patient observation, rather than any technical understanding of this world. And in that position, not knowing what the chemical signals mean, not being able to read the shadow patterns or the sediment disturbances, there is a certain freedom. You are not responsible for interpreting what you see correctly. You're only asked to see it. Different species of trilobites have colonized different parts of this seafloor environment, and their body shapes reflect the ecological niches they have come to occupy. The one you watched earlier, compact and active, is a bottom dweller, spending most of its time in contact with the sediment. But other trilobites have evolved forms that keep them higher in the water column, elongated, with more pronounced hydrodynamic profiles, capable of swimming in the slow, undulating way that the physics of their body plan permits. Some of them have enlarged eyes that face upward rather than sideways, an adaptation that suggests they spent time near the seafloor looking up for prey or predators above. Others have reduced or absent eyes entirely, suggesting they lived in zones too dark for vision to be useful, relying instead on chemoreception and vibration detection to navigate their world. This diversity within a single group is one of the hallmarks of evolutionary success. The trilobite body plan was not a fixed thing that could only produce one kind of animal. It was a flexible template, capable of being modified by natural selection to fill dozens of different ecological roles. In the Ordovician, trilobites are the most ecologically diverse group of complex animals in the sea, and their range of forms reflects the range of opportunities that the Ordovician ocean presents. They are grazers and predators and scavengers and filter feeders. They live in the tropics and in the cold polar waters. They are found on reef-like structures and in open sediment plains, and in the dark depths below the reach of sunlight. The one that enrolled is unfolding again now. It happens slowly. The pygidium drops away from the cephalon, the segments between them straightening out one by one until the animal is fully extended and motionless on the sediment, taking stock of the water around it. Whatever threat it perceived has apparently passed. Its antennae resume their careful sweeping arcs. Its legs begin to move in their coordinated ripple. It continues in the direction it was going before the interruption, following some gradient of chemistry or light or habit that carries it forward across the seafloor with the inexhaustible patience of an animal that has nowhere to be except here. You watch it go. The light above shifts slightly as something passes through the water column far above you, perhaps a large nautiloid, whose shadow falls briefly across the shelf before moving on. The trilobite does not stop again. Perhaps the shadow was not distinct enough to register as a threat, or perhaps the animal has already updated its assessment of the danger level in this immediate environment. It picks its way between a stand of crinoids, disappears briefly behind the bulk of a large Bryozoan colony, and re-emerges on the other side, smaller now with distance, but still moving in that same measured, purposeful way. The Ordovician ocean has produced in the trilobite something that will not be improved upon for a very long time. Not replaced, not outcompeted into irrelevance for another 150 million years. Not remembered, since the concept of memory does not apply to anything in this ocean. Simply continued. This body, this behaviour, these compound calcite eyes scanning a seafloor that will one day be limestone in a quarry in Ohio, or a cliff face in Morocco, and that contains, pressed into its sediment, the ghost of this exact moment. The crinoids wave. The current carries tiny particles of nutrition in its slow horizontal sweep. The trilobite is gone now, past the point where your eyes can follow it without effort, and you let it go. There will be others. There is time. The molt is one of the most vulnerable moments in a trilobite's life. The exoskeleton that provides its protection and its structural support is not a living tissue that grows as the animal grows. It is a secreted mineral structure, a calcium carbonate and chitin composite, that is fixed in size and must periodically be shed if the animal is to increase in body volume. The process of molting, which biologists call ekdies, a word that comes from the Greek for getting out, requires the trilobite to split open its exoskeleton along specific seams and emerge from it as a soft, vulnerable, temporarily defenseless organism. During this period, which lasts only until the new exoskeleton hardens, the trilobite is exposed to predation in a way that its normal armoured state does not permit. The enrolled defence that serves so well against the nautiloid's tentacles, or the biting mouthparts of a larger predator, requires a hard shell to be effective, and the newly molted trilobite has no hard shell. It hides. It burrows into the sediment as deeply as it can manage. It minimises its movement, and therefore its chemical signature in the water, trying to be as invisible as possible until the new exoskeleton has hardened enough to provide the protection the animal requires. The molted shells, the shed exoskeletons called exuviae, are among the most common trilobite fossils in the Ordovician record, far more common than the remains of the animals themselves. An individual trilobite might molt dozens of times in its life, each time leaving behind a complete cast of its former self in the sediment. These molted shells look so like living trilobites that early paleontologists sometimes struggled to distinguish them from actual preserved specimens, and the confusion contributed to various early overestimates of trilobite population sizes in fossil beds, where the exuviae were particularly abundant. You watch the seafloor for a long time, looking for evidence of this process. A split carapace half buried in the sediment, the distinctive pattern of the facial suture that opened to allow the animal's emergence, the pale underside of a recently shed thorax segment catching the diffuse light from above. There is one, over to the left of the main crinoid forest, lying against the base of a Bryozoan colony, a complete cephalon, the head shield of a trilobite that molted here and went on to grow larger in its new exoskeleton. The compound eyes are intact, their calcite facets still arranged in their original array, still technically capable of responding to light, though no longer connected to any nervous system that could process the response. It is strange to look at, stranger than looking at an intact living trilobite, because the shell is simultaneously the animal and not the animal. It is the exact shape of the creature's former self, every ridge and groove and surface texture preserved, but the creature is gone. It has moved on, literally, Somewhere on this seafloor, perhaps nearby, is a trilobite in a new and slightly larger version of this exact shape, continuing its crossing of the sediment in its patient way, unaware that its discarded shell is lying here in the diffuse light, slowly becoming part of the sediment record that will one day. You have been watching the seafloor, and it has given you much to see. But the ocean is not only its bottom. Above the sediment and the crinoid forests and the brachiopod beds, the water column rises through meters and tens of meters until it reaches the sunlit zone just below the surface, and in that long vertical space between the floor and the sky, different animals have claimed different depths, different distances from the light, different relationships to the current, and the pressure and the chemistry of the water at each level. Something is descending toward you now. You feel it before you see it. A displacement of water that arrives as a slight pressure change, a gentle push against your skin that tells you something is moving nearby. Something with volume and mass. Something large enough to disturb the water column in a way that reaches you even at this distance. And then it comes into view, and you understand what the Ordovician Ocean's largest predator looks like, and why the trilobites that live on the seafloor below have developed such effective armour. It is a nautiloid. The name will be familiar to anyone who has seen the modern nautilus, that elegant chambered shell coiled into a logarithmic spiral, the animal within trailing its tentacles through the water of a modern Pacific reef. But the creature descending toward you now is not coiled. It is straight. Its shell is an elongated cone, pointed at one end and open at the other, and it is large, much larger than the modern nautilus, which is already an impressive animal. This one is perhaps 2 meters long from the sealed tip of its shell to the opening from which its tentacles extend in a spreading cloud, and it moves through the water with a slow, pumping motion, drawing water into its mantle cavity and expelling it in a directed jet that provides thrust. The shell is beautiful. It is impossible to see it and not think that word, even knowing that beauty is a category that belongs entirely to the observer and means nothing whatsoever to the animal being observed. The shell's surface is smooth, or nearly smooth, marked with faint growth lines that indicate where the animal's tissues once pressed against the inner wall as it grew, and its colour, or what you perceive as its colour in this filtered light, is a warm amber shot through with paler streaks, like the grain of certain wood. The pointed tip is sealed, as are all the chambers that the animal has grown past over its years of life. Only the most recent chamber, at the open end, is occupied. The others are filled with gas, which the animal regulates to control its buoyancy, a hydraulic ballast system of extraordinary elegance, invented by mollusks in the late Cambrian and still functioning in various forms in the nautiluses of today. The nautiloid moves with a kind of slow, confident deliberateness that communicates, without any possible ambiguity, its position in the food web. It is not hurrying. It does not need to hurry. Almost nothing in the Ordovician Ocean is large enough to threaten it, and whatever might be large enough is also slow enough that speed, for this animal, is less important than precision. Its eyes, not compound like the trilobites, but simple camera-type eyes, closer to your own in their basic design, scan the water below it with an unhurried steadiness that is almost meditative. What does it see from up there, looking down toward the seafloor? The crinoid forest, certainly, a landscape of waving arms that must appear from above as a kind of moving carpet, alive with the small movements of individual organisms. The brachiopods would be harder to distinguish from the sediment that surrounds them. The trilobites, moving along the bottom, would be visible as mobile darker shapes against the paler substrate. And somewhere in that visual field, the nautiloid's brain, small but functional, more sophisticated than anything else in this ocean, is processing the information and making decisions that are not quite decisions in the way you make decisions, but are functional analogues to them, where to go, what to pursue, when to change direction. It descends farther. The water around you shifts as its bulk passes, and you drift slightly in the disturbance of its passage. It is close enough now that you can see the tentacles clearly, perhaps 20 or 30 of them, each one ridged with small adhesive structures that can grip prey and hold it against the nautiloid's hard beak. The beak is not visible right now, retracted within the animal's body, but you know it is there, and you understand, watching those tentacles trail in the water, what it would mean to be gripped by them. There is no danger for you here, of course. You are present in the way that a dream is present, observing without being observed, inhabiting without being inhabited. But there is something in the presence of this large predator that changes the quality of the water, changes the quality of the silence. The seafloor creatures below you have registered its approach in whatever way their nervous systems allow. The trilobites that were visible a few minutes ago have retreated, some into the sediment, some behind the structures of the Bryozoan colonies, some by simply stopping and relying on the camouflage of their shells against the substrate. The crinoids cannot retreat, being attached to the seafloor, but even they seem somehow different, their arms held a little more tightly, filtering a little less expansively, as though some chemical signal in the water has told them to be smaller for a while. The nautiloid is not hunting at this moment. It is descending through the water column in a passive glide, using the gas in its chambers to maintain a buoyancy that allows it to sink slowly without expending energy. This is one of the beauties of the chambered shell. As an evolutionary invention, the animal can rise and fall through the water column without the metabolic cost of constant swimming, simply by adjusting the pressure of the gas in its chambers and letting physics do the work. In a world where energy is always a limited resource, this is not a trivial advantage. But what does it feel like to be this animal? The question is unanswerable, of course. The nautiloid's inner experience, whatever it might be, is sealed behind evolutionary and biological differences so profound that no human imagination can reliably bridge them. And yet the question arises naturally as you watch it, because it is so clearly alive, so clearly present in this moment and this water, so clearly moving through a sensory world that is its own. Its eyes are open, its tentacles are extended and receptive. Something is being perceived, and that something is being processed by whatever neural substrate the nautiloid possesses, and the result is behavior, motion, direction, the slow pump of the siphuncle adjusting the gas pressure as the animal descends. It is alive, this animal. It is not a machine, even if describing its behavior in mechanistic terms is the most accurate way to explain what it does. There is something it is like to be a nautiloid in the Ordovician ocean, even if that something is so distant from any human experience that it cannot be translated into any language that currently exists. And sitting with that irreducible fact, the bare fact of another consciousness, however alien, inhabiting the water alongside you, is one of the quieter pleasures that this world offers. The nautiloid has reached the seafloor level now. It slows its descent by expelling a pulse of water, hovering briefly about a metre above the sediment, its tentacles sweeping forward and then back in a searching pattern. The trilobites that were near this spot are gone. The ones in adjacent areas are still as their biology allows, waiting for the large shape above them to move away. The nautiloid sweeps left, then right, then glides slowly in the direction of the crinoid forest, and for a moment you lose sight of it behind the forest of waving arms. There is a brief disturbance in the crinoid stands, a parting of the feathery arms, a slight collapse of one column as the nautiloid passes through it, grazing it with its shell. And then the nautiloid emerges on the far side of the forest and continues its passage, tentacles trailing, shell gleaming in the filtered light, heading in a direction that has no name in any language that will be invented for another 460 million years. You watch it go. The crinoid that was disturbed has righted itself, its stalk re-extending, its arms spreading again into their feeding position with a patience that takes your breath away. The chemical signals in the water are already dissipating, whatever message they carried decaying into background noise. The trilobites one by one emerge from their hiding places and resume the slow business of crossing the seafloor. The nautiloid is a sovereign here, but it is not a tyrant. It eats and moves and exists, and the ecosystem accommodates this, makes room for it, incorporates it into the cycling of nutrients and energy that keeps the whole system alive. Its presence is not a disruption. It is a thread in the fabric, as necessary as any other, as ancient as everything around it, and as entirely indifferent to its own importance as the water that carries it from one feeding ground to the next. Above you, distantly, another nautiloid is visible, smaller, moving in a different direction, its shell a paler shape against the sunlit water above. And beyond it, barely visible at this depth, you can make out the slow pulse of something even larger moving through the middle of the water column, a shape that is too distant and too indistinct to identify with certainty. The Ordovician ocean is not empty. It has never been empty. It is full of lives that proceed without any awareness of your presence, full of histories that are complete in themselves, full of a complexity that preceded human thought by an interval so large it can only be gestured toward with inadequate numbers. Let your eyes rest on the middle distance. Let the water hold you. The nautiloid will not return this way for some time, and in its absence the seafloor is already settling back into its normal rhythms, its small disasters and small recoveries, its constant patient exchange of nutrients and energy that has been going on since before the first trilobite hatched from its egg in this ancient sea. The nautiloid's method of locomotion is worth understanding in detail, because it's one of the most elegant solutions to the problem of movement in water that evolution has produced. The animal draws water into the mantle cavity, the space between its body and the inner surface of its shell, and then expels that water through a muscular tube called the hypernome, directing the jet in whatever direction will produce the desired movement. By pointing the hypernome forward, the animal jets backward. By angling it to one side, it turns. The system is simple in its basic physics and extraordinarily controllable in practice, allowing the nautiloid to make precise adjustments to its trajectory with each pulse of the siphon. This jet propulsion is, in one sense, the same physical principle that powers a modern squid. The nautiloid is, after all, a cephalopod mollusk, and the cephalopods have used jet propulsion as their primary locomotion strategy since their first appearance in the Cambrian. But the nautiloid, encumbered by its long, heavy shell, cannot achieve the burst speed that a modern squid can produce with its streamlined body. Its shell provides protection and buoyancy control, but it also creates drag, and the trade-off between these advantages and disadvantages has defined the evolutionary history of the cephalopods. Some lineages retained the shell and sacrificed speed, while others eventually reduced or internalized it and gained the explosive velocity that makes modern squids such effective predators. In the Ordovician, the trade-off favors the shell. The predators that could threaten a large nautiloid are few, and the buoyancy control that the chambered shell provides allows the animal to occupy any depth in the water column with metabolic efficiency that a shellless cephalopod could not match. The nautiloid drifts upward or downward by adjusting the gas pressure in its chambers, spending energy only when it needs to change depth or to pursue prey. In between these active moments, it is simply a buoyant object in neutral equilibrium with the water around it, moved by currents, spending almost no energy on maintaining its position. You watch it move from this perspective, and you understand something about patience that you may not have understood before. The nautiloid is not impatient. It does not experience the water column as something to be crossed quickly, or the depth as something to be achieved urgently. It simply is at whatever depth the gas in its chambers places it, and when prey is detected or a more favourable position is desired, it expends the energy to move there, and then it stops again. The economy of motion, the absence of any unnecessary expenditure of energy, the complete sufficiency of the present position, these are not virtues the nautiloid cultivates. They are simply the way the nautiloid is, expressed in the medium of this ancient water. The tentacles have retracted as the animal ascends slightly above the seafloor level, pulling back into the protection of the shell opening. It is not threatened. Nothing in the vicinity represents a threat to an animal of this size, but the retraction may be a response to the change in depth, the tentacles withdrawing as the animal reconfigures its sensory posture for a different portion of the water column. They will extend again. They always extend again. The nautiloid is always either feeding or moving toward feeding, and the tentacles are the instruments of feeding, and their periodic retraction is only a pause in the endless process of being a nautiloid in the Ordovician sea. The current has carried you a little distance from the crinoid forest, and the seafloor here is different. Not dramatically different. You're still in shallow water, still on the continental shelf, still in the same ocean that has been surrounding you since you first descended. But the substrate has changed. Where before you drifted above loose sediment interrupted by colonies and single organisms, now there is something beneath you that is more solid, more continuous, more clearly the product of accumulated biological work over long spans of time. You're above a reef. The word reef, in the modern world, conjures images of coral, the elaborate, branching, brightly coloured structures of calcium carbonate produced by tiny colonial animals that have defined warm shallow seas from the Triassic period to the present day. But this reef is not coral, not quite. The creatures that build it are different, though they occupy a similar ecological role, and the reef they have produced is different too. Less complex in some ways, more surprising in others, a structure that looks like nothing in any modern ocean and everything like the Ordovician itself. The primary builders here are stromatoporoids. They are sponges in the broad sense, poriferans, organisms that build their bodies from a network of channels and pores through which water flows, extracting food and oxygen from the current that passes through them. But stromatoporoids are not the familiar bath sponge of commerce, or the vase-shaped sponge of a Caribbean reef. They grow in low, spreading mounds, their surfaces smooth or gently humped, their interiors a labyrinth of thin calcite laminae and vertical pillars that give them a texture, in cross-section, that resembles certain ancient masonry. They are hard, they are massive, and in the Ordovician, they are the dominant contributors to carbonate reefs across the warm, shallow seas of the world. A single large stromatoporoid mound might be a metre across and half a metre high, and it has taken many decades to grow to that size. The calcite it secretes is laid down slowly, incrementally, each thin layer the product of another year of feeding and growth. When you run your hand, metaphorically in this place where you are a visitor without substance, across the surface of one of these mounds, you are touching time made solid. The surface is warm to the imagination, warmed by the sunlit water above, and it is rougher than it looks from a distance, the fine microstructure of the calcite producing a texture like very fine sandpaper. Around the stromatoporoid mounds, other organisms crowd in to take advantage of the hard substrate. Bryozoans encrust the sides of the mounds in thin, lacy sheets. Brachiopods colonize the hollows and protected areas where the current is gentled by the mass of the reef itself. Small trilobites pick their way across the reef surface, hunting for the organic detritus that accumulates in the microhabitats created by the irregular topography. And in certain crevices and overhangs, where the shadow is permanent and the water moves with a slightly different rhythm, unusual creatures have established themselves in the shelter of the reef's geometry. Tabulate corals appear here, among the earliest coral-like organisms in the fossil record. They are not exactly corals in the modern sense. Their internal anatomy differs in important ways from the reef-building scleractinian corals that will appear much later, but they produce a similar structure, small cylindrical tubes of calcium carbonate, packed closely together like the cells of a honeycomb, each tube housing a tiny polyp. In the Ordovician, tabulate corals are smaller and less dominant than they will become in the Silurian and Devonian periods ahead, but they are here, contributing their structures to the growing complexity of the reef, and watching them you can see the trajectory that leads, eventually, to the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, to the reefs of the Caribbean, to the great belts of warm water carbonate construction that have defined the tropics of every era since. What is being built here is not merely a physical structure, it is a habitat. And the difference between those two things, a structure and a habitat, is the difference between a wall and a city. The reef provides hard substrate for organisms that require it. It provides shelter for organisms that require that. It creates flow patterns in the surrounding water that concentrate food in some places and disperse it in others, and the organisms that live on and around the reef have evolved to exploit those patterns with remarkable precision. The reef is, in a sense, its own ecosystem nested within the larger ecosystem of the shelf, a world within a world, each level of biological organisation creating conditions that make new levels of organisation possible. You drift slowly along the reef edge, where the hard structure gives way to the soft sediment of the surrounding seafloor. This margin zone is particularly rich in life. The current running along the reef face is slightly accelerated by the change in topography, and this accelerated current carries more food particles past any given point than the still water of the open sediment plain. The organisms that have colonized this edge have benefited from this fluid dynamics for as long as the reef has existed, and some of them, the brachiopods in particular, are visibly more robust here than they were back in the open sediment area. They are bigger, more densely packed, their shells more heavily ribbed as though the extra energy available to them has been invested in structural reinforcement. Somewhere inside the reef, inside the physical mass of it, in the dark spaces between the stromatoporoid mounds and the incrustations of Bryozoan, there is a community of organisms that you cannot see from out here, worms and small crustaceans and juvenile brachiopods and organisms whose names in the Ordovician are simply shapes in the water. They live inside the reef the way people once lived inside ancient cities, using the walls for shelter, moving through the corridors of internal space, finding their food in the dark places where larger organisms cannot reach. The reef shelters them without intending to. It is not generous. It simply exists, and its existence creates opportunities that other lives have learned to exploit. There is something that resembles wonder in watching this, even knowing that wonder is a capacity of the observer and not a property of the observed. The reef does not know it is wonderful. The stromatoporoids do not experience the beauty of the structure they have built, do not appreciate the way the filtered afternoon light falls across their surfaces and illuminates the encrusting bryozoans in shades of pale gold and grey. They are secreting calcium carbonate as they have always done, drawing the ions from the seawater around them with a chemistry that is automatic and ancient, and the beauty is a byproduct, unintended and unperceived. And yet you perceive it. You, floating above this reef in the Ordovician Sea, are perhaps the first observer in the history of this planet with the cognitive architecture to experience this structure as beautiful. The trilobites with their compound eyes see the reef as a landscape of obstacles and opportunities, a terrain to navigate. The nautiloids see it as a concentration of potential prey. The brachiopods and bryozoans see nothing at all, in any sense that the word seeing applies to. They respond to chemical and mechanical stimuli, they filter and feed and grow, but the category of seeing, of perceiving an external world as a world, probably does not describe what they do. You are the only thing here capable of wondering what all of this means. The thought arrives quietly without drama, and you hold it for a moment before letting it dissolve back into the water around you. It is not a thought that requires a conclusion. It is simply a recognition that consciousness, wherever it appears, is a particular kind of presence in the world, and that its presence in this moment in this ocean is a small, improbable thing, and that the improbability is part of what makes it worth noticing. The reef extends in both directions along the shelf for as far as you can see, which in this filtered light and at this depth is not very far. Beyond the visible margin, it continues, interrupted by channels and deeper zones, and the occasional sandy gap where the sediment has not yet been colonized, and then continuing again, following the contours of the seafloor along the edge of the continent. It is not as large as the great reefs of later geological periods, the Devonian reef systems that will build structures visible from space, or the modern Great Barrier Reef that extends for over 2,000 kilometers. But it is real, and it is here, and the organisms that live on it and within it and around it are living their complete entire lives without any reference to the enormous future that is being built, in part from the patterns they are establishing right now. A small juvenile nautiloid drifts past the reef edge, its shell not yet 10 centimeters long, its tentacles splayed in the water with the uncoordinated exuberance of an animal that has not yet had time to learn precision. It is feeding on something, a worm perhaps that made the mistake of extending too far from the sediment, and the feeding is clumsy and a little desperate, the tentacles gripping and releasing and gripping again. It will grow larger, its shell will lengthen, and its beak will harden, and its hunting will become the effortless, confident process you witnessed in the adult that passed through earlier. But for now, it is young, and its youth, in this ancient ocean, looks exactly the way youth has always looked, full of effort and not yet full of grace. You watch it until it disappears around the seaward edge of a large stromatoporoid mound, and then you turn your attention back to the reef itself, to the long, slow work of calcium carbonate accumulation that is, grain by grain and polyp by polyp, building a structure that will persist for millions of years after the organisms that built it have become fossils in the limestone of a later world. The reef is patient. It has no choice but to be patient. Patience is not a virtue it cultivates. It is simply the tempo at which biological structures of this kind are built. One generation succeeds another, each one adding its small contribution to the whole, and the whole grows by increments so slow that no individual organism lives long enough to perceive the change. It is a process that operates on timescales that dwarf the trilobite's lifespan, that dwarf the nautiloid's lifespan, that dwarf the existence of the ocean itself as a distinct body of water. It is a process that only becomes visible in the fossil record, in the limestone layers of a future quarry, where a geologist with a hand lens and a good eye can read the history of this reef in the structure of the rock itself. Settle here for a while, the reef will still be here. The current is gentle along this edge, and the light above shifts almost imperceptibly as the sun moves through the day above the surface of the water. The stromatoporoids grow, the brachiopods filter, the trilobites pick their careful paths across the reef surface, and the ocean, old and patient and absolutely indifferent to the passage of time, holds everything in its slow embrace and continues as it has always continued, without interruption, without urgency, without any need for anything other than what it already is. The chemistry of the reef building process is worth pausing on, because it is not simply a biological process, it is a geochemical process, a transformation of dissolved ions in seawater into solid mineral structures that changes not only the local environment but the chemistry of the ocean itself. The stromatoporoids and the other carbonate-secreting organisms of this reef are, collectively, removing calcium and carbonate ions from the seawater around them and fixing them into solid calcium carbonate. This removal affects the saturation state of the surrounding water. Water that is below saturation in calcium carbonate tends to dissolve calcium carbonate structures rather than permit their growth, while supersaturated water facilitates precipitation of new carbonate. The Ordovician ocean is generally supersaturated with respect to calcium carbonate, which is one of the reasons that reef-building organisms can thrive in this period. The high atmospheric CO2 concentration that keeps the planet warm also dissolves into the ocean and tends to acidify it, which would work against carbonate saturation, but the high rate of carbonate production by organisms and the buffering capacity of the ocean system maintain conditions favourable for reef growth through most of the Ordovician. It is a balance, the chemistry of the ocean and the biology of the reef in a dynamic equilibrium that produces, over millions of years, the vast limestone formations that will one day be exposed as the rock record of this period. The stromatoporoid beside you has a structure that is visible in cross-section, where a piece of it has been broken away, perhaps by the passage of a large nautiloid, perhaps by some physical disturbance whose cause is no longer evident. In the exposed interior, the laminar structure of the stromatoporoid skeleton is visible. Thin horizontal layers of calcium carbonate separated by equally thin partitions, creating a structure that distributes stress remarkably effectively for a biological material. The same architectural principle, thin plates separated by spaces, underlies many modern engineering solutions to the problem of creating strong light structures, and it was arrived at by evolution in the Cambrian period and refined in the Ordovician without any knowledge of the engineering principles it was expressing. Around the break in the stromatoporoid, a community of organisms has colonized the newly exposed surface. Small Bryozoan encrusters have spread across the broken face, their lacy colony is already well established. A juvenile Brachiopod has settled in a protected hollow at the base of the break, its small shell already bearing the distinctive ribbing of its species. Several worm tubes, the calcified home structures of sedentary worm-like organisms, are visible as small projections from the Bryozoan encrustation, each one a tiny chimney of secreted material from which the worm inside extends its filtering apparatus into the water. The reef heals its wounds this way, not through any directed repair process. The stromatoporoid cannot regrow the tissue that was broken off, and it is not the stromatoporoid that is healing. Rather, the wound is colonized by the opportunistic organisms that are always present and always seeking suitable substrate, and their colonization creates a new surface where before there was only broken carbonate. The reef does not restore itself to what it was. It becomes something slightly different, a palimpsest of different organisms and different generations, each one leaving its trace on the surface that the previous one prepared. The reef is behind you now. The current has carried you away from the edge of the continental shelf, past the point where the seafloor begins to slope more steeply downward, past the reach of the refracted sunlight that made the reef zone so luminous. The water here is darker, not dark, not the absolute darkness of the deep ocean, which lies far below, but darker, the light filtered through greater depth and greater distance from the surface, the quality of it changing from warm gold to something cooler and more diffuse. The seafloor, where you can see it, is smoother here, the hard reef structures replaced by fine sediment that lies in thin, even layers, almost undisturbed. and drifting in the water around you at various depths are the graptolites. They are easy to miss at first. They are not as immediately striking as the nautiloid with its gleaming shell, not as architecturally impressive as the reef. They are thin, almost transparent structures that hang in the water column, like writing that someone has left in an unknown language on pieces of glass. But once you see them everywhere, and their abundance, their sheer, improbable abundance in this column of open water, begins to reshape your understanding of what the Ordovician Ocean actually is. A graptolite is a colonial organism. Each individual colony consists of a series of small cups, called thecae, arranged along a central stalk called a steep, and within each theca lives a tiny zooid, an individual animal, similar in its basic biology to the zooids inside a Bryozoan colony, but related to them only distantly. The whole colony hangs in the water from a float, a small gas-filled bladder or a bubble of secreted material that keeps it suspended at a particular depth, or it is anchored to the seafloor by a thin thread that allows it to rise into the water column while remaining attached to the bottom. Different species of graptolites have different numbers of steeps. Some have one, arranged in a simple pendant. Others have 2 or 4 or 8 or more, arranged in patterns that vary from species to species as distinctively as a fingerprint. The shapes they produce are remarkably varied for animals that are, at their core, doing the same thing, hanging in the water and filtering food particles from the current. Some species produce stipes that spiral, others that form flat fans, others that branch and branch again until the colony resembles a tiny perfect tree suspended upside down in the water column. What makes the graptolites extraordinary, from the perspective of anyone trying to understand the Ordovician Ocean, is their sensitivity to environmental conditions. Different species live at different depths, in water of different temperature and chemistry, and the graptolite fauna of any given layer of Ordovician sediment tells a story about the conditions at that depth at that time with a precision that no other group of organisms from this period can match. Paleontologists who study the Ordovician use graptolites as zone fossils, index species whose presence in a rock layer tells you not only that the layer is Ordovician, but, more specifically, which part of the Ordovician, which interval of geological time within the 45 million years of this period's duration. The graptolites drifting around you now are the inhabitants of the middle water column, not the sunlit zone near the surface, not the deepest darkness, but the intermediate space where the light is reduced but not absent, and the water temperature is cooler than it is above. Some of them are very close to you, close enough that you could touch them if touching were possible here. Thin, pale ribbons hanging in the water, each one a colony of perhaps 100 zooids, each zooid extending its tentacles into the current to intercept the microscopic particles that drift past. The silence here is different from the silence of the reef. On the reef, there was activity, movement, the slight disturbance of water by mobile organisms, the occasional passage of a larger animal that displaced the current in detectable ways. Here, in the open water column, away from the hard structures of the bottom, the silence is more complete. The graptolites do not move, not under their own power, not in response to stimuli in the way that a trilobite moves. They drift with whatever current carries them, and the current here is slow and even, and does not seem to be carrying them anywhere in particular. There is a deep peace in this. The graptolites do not know they are drifting. They do not experience the journey as a journey. They simply exist at whatever depth the physics of their float or their tether dictates, in whatever patch of water happens to be present at that depth at that moment, and they feed on what arrives and they grow when the conditions allow growth, and they reproduce when the chemistry and the temperature and the availability of resources reaches the threshold that triggers that process. They are not waiting for anything. They are not anticipating anything. They are simply being, in the most complete and uncomplicated sense of the word. What would it mean to aspire to that? To be so fully present in a single moment of physical existence that the distinction between waiting and not waiting simply collapses? The graptolite does not know what is coming. The great glaciation that will arrive at the end of the Ordovician period, the mass extinction that will eliminate most of its lineages, the replacement of these particular species by others that will be better adapted to the colder, less chemically stable ocean that the glaciation will produce. It does not know, and it does not need to know. The knowledge would not change what it does. It would hang in this water and extend its tentacles regardless. There is a lesson available here. though you can choose whether to take it. The lesson is not a formal one, not the kind that arrives with a statement and a conclusion. It is more like an atmosphere. The atmosphere of a world that has been doing exactly what it does for millions of years without once pausing to consider whether it is doing it correctly. The graptolites are not optimizing, the brachiopods are not striving, the trilobites are not achieving. They are simply expressing what they are in the medium of this particular ocean at this particular moment in geological time, and the expression is complete and sufficient in itself. A current from below carries a faint upwelling of cooler water through this zone, and the graptolite colonies near you respond, not by fleeing, not by any active behaviour, but by the passive fact of being slightly shifted in position as the water around them moves. Some of them rotate slowly around the axes of their floats, turning to present different faces to the current, and this slow rotation in the water gives them an almost meditative quality, like the slow turning of something suspended in a gentle breeze. You watch one particular colony rotate through a half-turn and then slowly begin its return, and the patience of this motion, the complete absence of urgency in it, settles into the space behind your eyes like something warm. The upwelling from below brings with it a change in the water's chemistry, a slight increase in the concentration of certain dissolved nutrients that have been carried up from the depths, where the decomposition of organic material produces them in abundance. The graptolite zooids respond to this change in the most immediate possible way. They extend their tentacles a little more fully, they beat their cilia at a slightly higher frequency, they intercept slightly more of the particle rain that falls through the water column. The response is automatic, biochemical, requiring no neural processing in any sophisticated sense. But it is a response. It is a kind of awareness, however minimal, of the conditions that surround the organism and the opportunities those conditions present. Below you, the water darkens progressively toward the deeper zones where the Ordovician ocean keeps its deeper secrets. The graptolites of those depths are different species, adapted to lower oxygen concentrations, to cooler temperatures, to the rain of organic particles that falls from the productive zones above, and provides their food without any sunlight to supplement it. Down there, in the darkness that is permanent at this depth, the seafloor is a very different place from the reef zones and sediment plains you have already visited. It is quieter, it is colder, and the creatures that live there have evolved in response to conditions that are, in their own way, as extreme as anything the Ordovician ocean produces. But you're not going there yet. The middle water column still has things to show you, and the graptolites around you have not finished their slow, unhurried drifting. Somewhere above you, several meters above, in the brighter water near the surface, the light is shifting as the sun moves across the sky of the Ordovician day, a sky that is clear and blue and absolutely devoid of any life that could be seen from the surface, the land behind the horizon a bare and uninhabited silence. The day passes. The water continues to move its slow cargo of organisms from one place to another. The graptolites turn in their imperceptible current. There are moments, watching this, when the distance between the Ordovician and the present moment seems to collapse entirely. Not because the two times are similar, they are profoundly different in almost every way that matters, but because the experience of simply being present, of floating in water with open attention, is apparently something that does not change much over 460 million years. The body that floats in the modern ocean, the one that breathes and drifts and lets its weight be supported by the water, is not so different in its basic experience from whatever experience the water itself offers, which is old and generous and asks nothing in return. Let the graptolites drift. Let them turn. Let the upwelling from below bring its cool chemistry past you and continue upward to the sunlit zone above. The day is long here in the Ordovician tropics, and the light above will hold for several more hours before the sun descends and the quality of the water column changes again, becoming something slightly different, slightly stiller, as the ocean's diurnal rhythms shift into their nighttime register. Rest here. The open water is patient. The graptolites do not mind your presence. The current is gentle and does not require anything of you. There is only the slow drift and the faint pale shapes of the colonies around you, and the darkening water below that holds more of this world's secrets than you have yet been given the opportunity to discover. The graptolite colony you have been watching for some time has stopped rotating. The current that was causing its slow spin around the axis of its float has shifted, and now the colony hangs almost motionless in the water, its stipes arranged in a vertical pendant that catches the diffuse light from above in a way that makes each small theca visible as a faint protrusion from the main stipe. There are perhaps 80 thecae on this particular colony, each one a little cup of organic material in which a zooid lives and extends its feeding apparatus into the water. The zooids of a graptolite colony are connected to one another by a living tissue that runs through the central rod of the stipe. This tissue is not a nervous system. There is no evidence that graptolites had anything resembling a centralized neural processing center, and the coordination of the colony's activities, such as it is achieved through chemical signaling rather than electrical impulse. But the connection means that what happens to one part of the colony affects other parts. A stress in the float that changes the colony's orientation affects every zooid's access to the current. A chemical signal indicating the presence of food causes an uptick in the feeding activity of zooids throughout the colony. The colony is a collective, and its success as a collective depends on the cooperation of its many individuals in a way that has no exact analogue in the behaviour of solitary animals. A single zooid is almost nothing, a tiny cup of organic material filtering a tiny volume of water. A colony of 80 zooids, spread over a steep that may be several centimetres long and positioned to intercept a broad cross-section of the water column, is a significantly more effective feeding apparatus. The colonial form is not merely a way of being many, it is a way of being more than many, a synergy of individual components that produces something greater than their sum. This principle, that collections of simple units can produce capabilities that no single unit possesses, is one of the oldest and most generative discoveries that evolution has made. It underlies the transition from single-celled to multicellular life, the evolution of colonial organisms like the graptolites and the Bryozoans, and eventually the evolution of the specialized tissues and organs of complex animals. The graptolite colony is not on the road to becoming an organ. That is not the direction its evolutionary lineage will take. But it is an expression of the same fundamental discovery that makes organs possible, that many simple things working together in an organized way can do what no single simple thing can do alone. Another graptolite colony drifts past yours, a different species, with 2 stipes instead of 1, arranged in a gentle V shape that hangs below its float like a living tuning fork. The 2-stiped configuration presents a different cross-sectional area to the current than the single pendant configuration, and may be more effective in certain current conditions while less effective in others. The variety of graptolite configurations found in the Ordovician fossil record, species with 1, 2, 4, 8 stipes, species with stipes that spiral, that branch, that splay outward in fans, suggest that evolution has been exploring this parameter space thoroughly, trying different configurations in different environments, discovering through the process of differential survival which configurations work best in which conditions. The water that carries these colonies is not neutral with respect to the information it contains. It carries dissolved gases and minerals and organic molecules in concentrations that vary with depth and location, and the graptolites, though they cannot move themselves through the water, are nevertheless sensitive to some of this variation through the chemistry of their feeding and metabolic processes. They do not choose where they are in the water column in the way that a mobile animal chooses its position, but they are not entirely passive either. The growth of the colony can be modified by the conditions the colony experiences, producing slightly different stipe lengths and theca spacings in response to the chemical environment of the water around them. The graptolite is shaped by its place in the ocean, as surely as the ocean's chemistry is shaped, in part, by the presence of the graptolites filtering it. If you are drifting now, if the water around you has become indistinguishable from the weight of sleep, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. The descent continues. It is not dramatic. There is no point where the light switches off, no threshold you cross that announces your passage from one zone to another. The darkness accumulates the way all gradual things accumulate, one small increment at a time, each moment only slightly different from the moment before it, until at some point you notice that the water around you is not the same water it was when the descent began. It is cooler, it is darker. The graptolites here are of different species. Some of them have more steeps than the ones above, some have fewer, some have adopted geometries that look almost mathematical in their precision. The pressure is greater here. You feel it not as pain. You're not susceptible to pressure in the way that a physical body would be, but as a quality of the water itself, a density, a solidity that the shallower water lacked. It is the way a thick blanket feels compared to a thin one, the same substance, but more of it. And the more of it presses back against you with a weight that is also, in its way, a comfort. You are enclosed. You are held. The water that has been holding you since you first descended is now holding you more firmly, and there is nothing threatening about this. It is simply the physics of depth. The seafloor, when it finally becomes visible beneath you, is almost featureless. Almost, but not quite. There are no crinoid forests here, no reef structures, no brachiopod beds dense enough to be visible from above. The sediment is fine and dark and undisturbed, laid down in the calm of water that carries almost no horizontal current at this depth, the particles settling out of the water column above over millions of years of slow precipitation. You could read the history of the Ordovician in these sediment layers if you had the tools and the knowledge, each thin band of material a record of a particular season, or a particular decade, or a particular event in the overlying water column. But from above, the seafloor here looks almost empty. Looks. The Ordovician deep is not empty, any more than the deep sea is empty now. It is simply differently populated, by organisms adapted to the darkness, the pressure, the cold, the limited food supply, in ways that make them almost invisible to an observer expecting the dense, visible life of the shallower zones. Something moves in the sediment below you. It is a trace, not the organism itself, but the groove it leaves in the fine material of the seafloor as it moves through it. The trace curves and branches and curves again, leaving a record in the sediment that will persist, transformed but legible, in the rock record of a future geologist's field site. The creature making this trace is unknown to you, some soft-bodied organism that leaves no shell, no hard parts, nothing except this record of its passage through the mud. It is there, in the darkness of the substrate, and then it is not there, and the trace is what remains. A curved line in the sediment that says simply, something was here, and it was alive, and it was moving. The deep Ordovician seafloor is full of these traces. Ichnofossils, paleontologists call them, trace fossils, the preserved records of biological activity rather than of biological bodies. They tell a story that body fossils cannot tell, the story of behavior, of movement, of the way organisms interacted with the substrate they lived in. A trace fossil tells you that an organism was there. It tells you something about the way the organism moved, about the substrate it preferred, about the depth of water it inhabited. It does not tell you what the organism looked like, but it tells you that it was alive, and alive in this specific place, doing this specific thing at this specific moment in the 460 million years of the Ordovician. You drift above the traces and imagine the animals that made them. They are soft things, probably. Worms of various kinds or creatures whose relationship to modern animals is too distant to be captured by any word derived from familiar biology. They are moving through the sediment the way you might move through a very thick liquid, pushing through the substrate with whatever appendages they possess, following the chemical gradients that lead toward organic material to consume. They cannot see. They do not need to see. Down here, vision would be meaningless. There is nothing to see with, and nothing that reflects light even if there was something to emit it. This is a world of chemistry rather than light. The organisms that inhabit the deep Ordovician seafloor navigate by concentration gradient, by temperature differential, by the faint electrical fields generated by the metabolic activity of other organisms. They find each other and avoid each other and find their food by following invisible trails of dissolved molecules through water that, to human senses, would be completely undifferentiated. It is a sensory world entirely different from the one you inhabit, and it is perfectly functional, has been functioning for hundreds of millions of years before this moment, and will continue to function for hundreds of millions of years after it. What might it be like, if it is like anything at all, to exist in such a world? To live inside the sediment in permanent darkness, navigating by chemical gradient alone, your entire sensory world composed of concentrations and temperatures and electrical signals rather than colours and shapes and the play of light on surfaces. It is not a diminished world. It is a different one, complete in its own terms, full of the information that matters to the creatures that inhabit it. The absence of vision does not make the deep seafloor organism less alive or less present in its environment than the trilobite with its compound eyes. It makes it differently present, according to different categories of perception. There is something restful about this idea. The thought that presence does not require a particular set of senses, does not require seeing or hearing, or the particular calibration of consciousness that humans bring to their experience of the world. The worm in the sediment below you is present. The bacterium on the surface of a deep-sea grain is present. The graptolite floating in the water column above is present. Each of them inhabits its world in the way that is available to it, and the inhabitance is complete, and it is enough. A slight current from somewhere to your left brings a change in the chemical composition of the water around you. Not dramatic, not alarming, just a small shift in temperature and dissolved gas concentration that marks the boundary between one water mass and another. The deep ocean is not homogeneous. Even here, even in this dark zone far from the surface influences that drive the mixing of the shallow seas, there are boundaries and gradients. Pockets of slightly different water that the organisms of this zone have learned to read as precisely as the trilobite reads the movement of light and shadow on the seafloor above. You let the current carry you along this boundary, this faint seam in the chemistry of the deep water. The sediment below continues its slow accumulation, each grain settling into place with a patience that makes the construction of the reef above seem frantic. Down here, the world operates on a different clock entirely. The metabolism of organisms slowed by cold and limited food, the geological processes accumulating results that will not be fully legible for another 100 million years. This is the deep foundation of the Ordovician Ocean. Not the most dramatic part, not the most visually striking, but perhaps the most ancient. These dark, cold, nutrient-limited depths are closer in character to the earliest oceans of Earth's history, the Precambrian seas in which life spent most of its history as microscopic chemistry, before the great experiments of the Cambrian changed what was possible. Down here, in the quiet and the cold, the old story continues. Something moves through the sediment. A trace curves and branches. The water holds its deep silence. There is no reason to linger here too long. The darkness is not threatening, but it offers less to the eye than the zones above, and the eye, even in this place where it is only a metaphor for attention, is drawn toward light. The ascent from this depth will be gradual, unhurried, a slow return through the water column to the warmer and brighter zones where the productive life of the Ordovician Ocean is most visible. But before you begin that ascent, take a moment with the deep quiet of this place. Feel the pressure of the water. Feel the way it presses equally from all directions, not compressing you but enclosing you, holding you in a three-dimensional embrace that has no equivalent on land. The darkness is not absolute. There is some faint bioluminescence here, produced by bacteria and a few specialized organisms that have learned to generate their own light in the absence of the suns. It is not enough to see by, in any conventional sense. But it is there. Faint cold sparks in the water, brief and irregular. The chemistry of life producing light as a byproduct of processes that have nothing to do with illumination. The deep ocean makes its own small stars. In the darkness of this place, 460 million years before the nearest human eye, tiny lights wink on and off in the water column, each one the signature of a living thing going about its business in the deep, and the effect, if you could see it with the sensitivity of an eye adapted to this darkness, would be something like the night sky, scattered, irregular, beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with intention, and everything to do with the sheer, stubborn fact of life in every place where physics allows it. The sediment of the deep Ordovician seafloor is an archive. This word, archive, usually refers to a deliberate act of preservation, a purposeful keeping of records for future reference. The sediment does not preserve purposefully. It preserves accidentally through the physical and chemical processes that transform loose particles into consolidated rock over millions of years, and the records it preserves are not records that anyone made a decision to keep. They are simply the residue of events that occurred in the water column above, the deaths of organisms, the formation of minerals, the settling of particles large and small through the water until they come to rest on the seafloor and are incorporated into the sediment. The archive is selective. Some materials preserve well and some materials preserve poorly, and the selectivity of preservation determines what the geological record can tell us about the past. Calcium carbonate preserves well in environments where the water is not undersaturated with respect to it, which the deep ocean sometimes is, since cold water at high pressure can dissolve calcium carbonate that would be stable at the surface. Silica preserves well in environments where biological production of siliceous organisms is high and the dissolution rate is low. Organic matter preserves well in anoxic environments where the bacteria that would normally consume it cannot operate. The deep Ordovician seafloor of the anoxic zones, the areas where the bottom water lacks oxygen, is one of the best preserving environments in the ocean. Here, the black shale that will one day contain the fossil graptolites has been accumulating in thin, even layers since before the Ordovician began. Each layer is a snapshot of conditions in the water column above at a particular moment in geological time, the species of graptolites present, the types of particles falling from the productive surface zone, the chemical composition of the water. A geologist with the right tools and knowledge can read this record layer by layer, reconstructing the history of the Ordovician ocean from the sediment it left behind. You are floating above this archive now, unaware of its future significance, simply present in the moment that is being recorded in the sediment below you. The particles settling through the water column around you, tiny shell fragments, organic aggregates, mineral grains, will become, in some distant future, part of the rock layer corresponding to this exact moment. If a geologist could find that layer and read it precisely enough, they would detect in its chemistry the signature of the conditions that currently surround you, the temperature of the water, the composition of the plankton, the concentration of dissolved gases. The moment is being recorded. It always is. The ocean does not forget what happens in it, even when nothing in the ocean is capable of remembering. The ascent is as gradual as the descent was. You rise through the water column the way a thought rises in the morning, slowly from somewhere darker and deeper, moving toward the light without quite knowing when the transition happened. The water around you brightens by degrees. The pale grey of the deep zone warms to a greenish blue, and that to a clearer, more luminous blue, and then you are in the upper water column, and the surface is visible above you as a moving, shimmering boundary between the ocean and the air, and the quality of the light here is something different from anything you have experienced in the hours of your descent and your exploration of the depths. The Ordovician surface ocean is alive. You knew this intellectually in the way you knew that the deep seafloor was alive, but the knowing was not the same as arriving. Here, in the sunlit zone, the photic zone, where light penetrates in sufficient quantity to drive photosynthesis, the concentration of life is orders of magnitude higher than anything you encountered below. Not in terms of visible animals, not in terms of creatures large enough to track with the eye. In terms of microscopic organisms, algae, cyanobacteria, protists of various kinds, the water around you is almost dense with life, a population of beings so small that each one is invisible individually, but whose collective presence gives the water a slightly greenish cast, a slight turbidity, a faint, sweet chemical smell that speaks of photosynthesis proceeding on an enormous scale. These are the phytoplankton of the Ordovician, and they are the foundation of almost everything. Every crinoid colony, every Brachiopod, every Trilobite, every nautiloid, every creature in every zone of this ocean is ultimately dependent on the energy that these microscopic photosynthesizers capture from the sunlight above. They are not impressive in the way that a nautiloid is impressive. They do not inspire the kind of quiet awe that a stromatoporoid reef inspires, but without them, the reef would not exist. Without them, the water column would be clear and largely empty, a beautiful but sterile medium with no food chain to fill it. The Ordovician phytoplankton are different in their composition from the modern phytoplankton assemblage. Some of the major groups of modern marine algae, the diatoms, the coccolithophores, have not yet evolved. Their ecological roles are occupied by other organisms, acritarchs, which are organic walled cysts of uncertain biological affinity, chitinozoans, which are also of uncertain affinity, and may have been the egg cases of animals rather than single-celled organisms, and various kinds of green algae whose modern relatives are still present in both marine and freshwater environments. The details are different from the modern ocean, but the fundamental process is the same. Light from the sun, transformed by photosynthesis into organic carbon, providing the energy that powers everything else. Above the surface of the ocean, above that shimmering boundary between water and air, the Ordovician atmosphere is different from the modern one in ways that are interesting to think about. The oxygen concentration is lower, perhaps 60 or 70% of its modern level. The carbon dioxide concentration is higher, perhaps 8 or 10 times the pre-industrial modern level. A greenhouse gas concentration that keeps the planet warm, that maintains the tropical seas in their warm, productive state, that prevents the formation of large ice sheets at the poles. The sky above is blue, as it is now. The physics of light scattering through an atmosphere of nitrogen and oxygen is the same in the Ordovician as it is today. But there are no clouds formed by aerosols from forest fires or biological activity from land, because there are no forests and almost no land-based biological activity to produce those aerosols. It is a cleaner atmosphere than the modern one, in the sense of being less chemically complex, less influenced by the activities of the trillion organisms that will one day cover the land surfaces of the planet. But it is not sterile. The ocean surface is constantly exchanging gases with the atmosphere, absorbing carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen, and the chemistry of the interaction shapes both the ocean and the air above it in ways that are subtle and pervasive and fundamental to the stability of the planetary system. You float at the surface now, half in the water and half in the air, and you can see the horizon of the Ordovician ocean in every direction. It is an horizon without landmarks. There are no ships, no lighthouses, no distant smudge of smoke from a coastal city. There is no coast visible from here. You're far enough offshore that the low, bare land of the Ordovician continent is below the horizon, even on the clearest day. There is only water and sky, and the faint shimmering border between them, and the distant shapes of something large moving through the surface film from below. Those large shapes are nautiloids. Seen from the surface rather than from below, they look different. Their shells are visible as elongated shadows just beneath the surface, moving with the slow, pumping propulsion that you recognize from your earlier encounter. Some of them are larger than the one you saw near the reef. The surface zone is rich in prey, and the largest nautiloids of the Ordovician have learned to hunt here, in the warm, productive water just below the surface where the phytoplankton are most concentrated, and the small creatures that feed on them are correspondingly abundant. The zooplankton, the small animals that feed on the phytoplankton, are present in vast numbers in this surface water. Many of them are trilobite larvae, recently hatched from eggs laid in the sediment far below, rising through the water column to spend their early development in the food-rich surface zone, before descending to the bottom when they are large enough to survive there. Others are the larvae of brachiopods and echinoderms and various worm species, tiny versions of adult organisms spending the first days or weeks of their lives as planktonic drifters, before metamorphosing into their adult forms and sinking to the seafloor to begin their sessile or benthic lives. The larval trilobites are extraordinary to see if you can bring your focus down to the scale at which they exist. A newly hatched trilobite is not much larger than a grain of sand, a single calcified segment, the protaspid stage, that looks almost nothing like the adult animal it will become. It moves through the water by beating tiny appendages, consuming single-celled algae and bacterial aggregates that are almost the same size as itself. In the plankton, it is not a dominant or impressive creature. It is prey for almost everything larger than itself, and only a tiny fraction of the eggs that produce these larvae will survive to become the sediment-roaming adults that you observed earlier. This is the economy of the Ordovician Ocean, stated in its simplest terms. The sun provides energy. The phytoplankton capture it. The zooplankton, larvae, copepod-like creatures, various small consumers, eat the phytoplankton. Larger animals eat the zooplankton. Larger animals still eat those, and the waste products and dead bodies of all of them sink slowly toward the seafloor, carrying their cargo of organic material down through the water column, enriching the sediment that lies below, feeding the worms and the burrowing organisms and the bacteria that decompose what arrives and return its constituent molecules to the water to begin the cycle again. It is a cycle, not a perfect one. Nothing in biology is perfectly efficient, and the Ordovician Ocean, like all ecosystems, loses some energy at every trophic transfer, some matter to processes that are not immediately recycled. But it is a cycle, and it has been running without interruption for millions of years before this moment, and it will continue to run. Modified by the coming ice age, disrupted by the extinction at the end of the Ordovician, but fundamentally maintained, for hundreds of millions of years afterward, in one form or another, until the sun itself expands and the ocean evaporates, and the cycling of organic matter in the seas of Earth comes finally to an end. For now, though, the cycle is running. The sun is high, it is midday in the tropics, the light nearly vertical, the water below the surface illuminated to a depth of perhaps 100 meters. The phytoplankton are photosynthesizing at their maximum rate. The zooplankton are feeding, the nautiloids are hunting, the trilobite larvae are doing their best to avoid becoming food, while accumulating the calcium carbonate they will need to build their first proper segments, and the ocean's surface shimmers in the tropical sun, and the waves, small waves, the Ordovician Sea is not particularly rough today, roll in gentle succession from one direction, and the horizon is clear, and the sky is blue, and there is nothing anywhere in this scene that knows what a human being is, or will be, or might become. You rest at the surface. The warmth is real. The tropical sun of the Ordovician is approximately as warm as the tropical sun of the present day, and the surface water here is warm, perhaps 28 or 29 degrees Celsius, bath water warm, the kind of warmth that removes the distinction between the water and the air and the body floating in between them. You feel, here at the surface of the Ordovician Ocean, exactly what the earliest marine organisms might have felt if they had been capable of feeling anything. The warmth of the sun that makes photosynthesis possible, the salt of the water that dissolves the minerals that make biology possible, the slow rocking of the surface waves that is not distressing but settling, a rhythm that is older than any heartbeat. Older than any heartbeat. Let that phrase do its work in you. Let the surface of this ancient ocean rock you gently for a while, neither asking you to go deeper, nor requiring you to return to any shore. There is time. The Ordovician has 40 million more years of this ocean ahead of it, and in those 40 million years, there is no moment more or less important than this one, no moment that asks more of you than to be here, floating, warm, with your eyes on the horizon of a world that has never known the word horizon. The sun moves, the phytoplankton photosynthesize, the nautiloids hunt, the trilobite larvae drift and feed and try to survive, and the ocean continues its ancient business beneath you, patient and indifferent and full of life beyond reckoning, full of processes that will not be understood for another 460 million years, and that do not need to be understood in order to be real. The Ordovician atmosphere above this surface is something to think about for a moment, because the air you would be breathing if you were actually here is not quite the same air that supports modern life. The oxygen concentration is lower, perhaps 60 to 70% of the modern level. This is not low enough to cause immediate distress to a person accustomed to modern air, but it would make sustained physical exertion more demanding. The reduced oxygen comes from the fact that the great coal forests of the Carboniferous, which will produce a massive pulse of oxygen burial and atmospheric oxygen increase, have not yet evolved. The oxygen in this Ordovician atmosphere is the product of millions of years of marine photosynthesis, accumulated slowly, and it is sufficient for the creatures that have evolved to use it. The early land arthropods on the sparse Ordovician shore, the marine invertebrates in the water below, but it represents a lower ceiling on possible metabolic rates than the Carboniferous air will eventually provide. The carbon dioxide is higher, perhaps 8 to 10 times the pre-industrial modern concentration. This is the greenhouse gas that keeps the Ordovician warm, that maintains the tropical seas in their productive state, that prevents the formation of the polar ice caps that will arrive at the end of the period. In a world with this much atmospheric CO2, the greenhouse effect is strong, and the temperature difference between the tropics and the poles is smaller than it is in modern times, which means the atmospheric circulation is different. The winds are weaker, the weather systems less energetic, the ocean surface less disturbed by storm systems. It is in some ways a calmer atmosphere than the modern one. The sky above the Ordovician Ocean would look almost identical to the modern sky to a human observer. Blue above, shading toward white near the horizon, clouds forming over the warm water where convection is strongest. The sun moving across the sky from east to west with the same apparent speed and size it has today, though it is technically slightly less luminous than the sun of the present day. There is nothing in the sky that would tell a human observer that this is not a modern day. No smog, no contrails, no satellites catching the sunlight in brief flashes against the blue. Simply the sky, doing what the sky has always done, which is to be the boundary between the atmosphere and space, and to let the sun's light through and to scatter the blue wavelengths in every direction, and to hold the clouds that form and dissipate over the ocean below. The stillness of the ocean surface today is partly a function of this gentler atmospheric circulation. The swell rolling in from the east is moderate, the product of winds somewhere far out in the open ocean, transmitted to this location as wave energy rather than as wind. If you watch the surface carefully, you can see the individual waves as they approach, the slight lift and forward motion as each one passes beneath you, the slight drop after it passes, the next one already rising in the middle distance. The rhythm is the rhythm of the open ocean, slower and more regular than the choppy surface of a disturbed nearshore zone, and it produces in the body a response that is pre-verbal and precognitive, a settling, a release of whatever held tension had accumulated, a return to something that the body recognizes as its natural state. Time passes in the Ordovician in ways that have no correspondence to the passage of time as you experience it. 1,000,000 years here is not a dramatic event. It is a slow shift in the average temperature of the ocean, a slight change in the composition of the phytoplankton community, a gradual alteration in the geographic range of certain trilobite species as the water they prefer cools or warms or moves in response to the great machinery of plate tectonics and atmospheric chemistry. 1,000,000 years here is almost nothing, and yet, accumulated over tens of millions of years, these slow shifts produce the world. Something is changing. You cannot feel it in this particular moment, in this particular patch of warm tropical water. But if you could step back, if you could see the Ordovician ocean from a vast height, spread out below you in time as well as space, you would see the change beginning. It begins in the south, in the waters around the great supercontinent Gondwana as it drifts toward the pole. The ocean there is growing colder as Gondwana's leading edge moves into the higher latitudes, and in the cold southern waters, something extraordinary is starting to happen. Ice is forming. Not sea ice, though sea ice will come too, but glacial ice, sheets of ice accumulating on the continental surface of Gondwana as it enters the polar regions, growing year by year from the precipitation that falls as snow and does not fully melt in the southern summers. The Ordovician glaciation, one of the most severe ice ages in Earth's history, though not the first, will arrive at the end of this period, approximately 45,000,000 years from now, relative to the moment you currently inhabit. It will be triggered by the drawdown of atmospheric carbon dioxide, as the rate at which CO2 is consumed by geological processes, weathering of rocks, burial of organic carbon, temporarily outpaces the rate at which volcanic activity replenishes it. The CO2 concentration in the atmosphere will drop, the greenhouse effect will weaken, the planet will cool. The cooling will be dramatic by geological standards, which means it will be gradual by any human standard of observation. The polar ice sheets will grow. The sea level will drop as water is locked up in ice. The circulation patterns of the ocean will change as the temperature gradient between the tropics and the poles increases, driving stronger currents and deeper mixing. The chemistry of the ocean water will shift as it cools. Cold water holds more oxygen, holds certain dissolved gases in higher concentrations, makes life easier for some organisms and harder for others. For the warm water species that dominate this Ordovician tropical shelf, the reef-building stromatoporoids, the brachiopods adapted to the current carbonate chemistry, the trilobite species calibrated to this particular range of temperature, the cooling will be catastrophic. The great Ordovician Silurian extinction that follows the glaciation will be the second largest mass extinction in Earth's history, eliminating approximately 85% of all marine species. The reef ecosystems that you have been watching will be dismantled. The precise brachiopod assemblages that have colonized this sediment will disappear. Many of the trilobite lineages, including some of the species you have observed, will not survive. But you do not know this yet, and neither do the creatures around you, and the not knowing is perhaps the most honest state available in this moment. The warm water is warm, the reef is building, the trilobites are crossing the sediment in their unhurried way. The nautiloids are hunting, the graptolites are drifting. The world is in this moment as complete and as functional and as alive as it will ever be, and the catastrophe that is approaching at geological speed is no more present in this moment than the fall of any particular star is present in the light of a clear night sky. You notice a change in the quality of the current, though. Something has shifted in the character of the water that reaches you from the south. It is fractionally cooler than it was. The difference is almost imperceptible. Perhaps 1/10 of a degree, perhaps less. But it is there, a faint whisper from the high latitudes where Gondwana is moving toward its polar destiny. The phytoplankton that prefer slightly cooler water are, in this season, slightly more abundant than they were a century ago. The Brachiopod species that is sensitive to temperature has shifted its range barely perceptibly northward, following its preferred conditions as those conditions slowly migrate. Everything is always in motion in the Ordovician. The tectonic plates move, the ocean currents shift, the atmospheric chemistry fluctuates, the species ranges expand and contract in response to conditions that are themselves changing on timescales ranging from the annual to the geological. The world is not static. It has never been static. What looks like stability, the reef that has been building for 1,000,000 years, the brachiopod beds that look like they have been here forever, is actually a dynamic equilibrium, a balance that is continuously maintained against continuous perturbation, and that can be tipped, given sufficient perturbation, into a new equilibrium, or into no equilibrium at all. The coming cooling, the approach of the Ordovician Ice Age, is a perturbation of sufficient magnitude to tip the balance, but not yet, not in this moment. The reef is still warm, the water is still clear, the trilobites are still crossing the sediment in their measured, purposeful way, following chemical gradients toward food with an optimism, if that word can be applied to an organism without the neural complexity for optimism. That is simply the operational state of a living thing in a productive environment. There is something in this, in the combination of beauty and impermanence, that is worth sitting with for a moment. Not the impermanence alone, not the inevitable approach of the extinction event that will erase so much of what you are seeing. That is too easy a meditation, too obvious a conclusion. The reef is beautiful and it will be destroyed, therefore contemplate the nature of impermanence. That is not quite what this moment is offering. What it is offering is more specific and more interesting. That the reef is beautiful because it is this reef, in this ocean, at this moment. Built by these organisms over these millions of years, and the specificity of all those facts is what makes it irreplaceable. There will be other reefs. There have always been other reefs. But this particular reef, this particular assemblage of stromatoporoids and brachiopods and trilobites and graptolites, this exact configuration of biological relationships and physical conditions, this is a singular thing, occurring once in the entire history of the universe, and the fact that it will end does not make it less singular. You feel the slight cooling in the current again. It is so slight as to be nearly imaginary. A drift of water from somewhere to the south, bearing a temperature that is 1/2 a degree lower than the surrounding water, spreading through this area in a thin tongue that will warm within hours as it mingles with the tropical sea around it. The organisms that live here will not notice it. They do not have the sensory resolution to detect a change so small, but it is there, and in the geological long game, small changes made repeatedly over millions of years produce large results. The sun is moving toward the west now. The afternoon quality of the light falls across the reef at a shallower angle, catching the sides of the stromatoporoid mounds and illuminating the brachiopods on the reef face with a warmth that the near-vertical midday sun could not produce. It is, if such a thing can be said of the Ordovician, a beautiful afternoon, the kind of afternoon that asks nothing of anyone, that simply provides light and warmth and the slow sound of water moving through water and is content with that provision. Somewhere in the southern hemisphere a glacier is accumulating. One winter's snowfall exceeds the following summer's melt by a small margin, and that margin is preserved, compacted into firn and then into ice, added to by the next winter and the winter after that. The glacier does not know it is the beginning of something large. It is simply ice, following the physics of its situation, accumulating because the conditions that allow accumulation are present. The physics that allows it is the same physics that governs the cooling current drifting past you now, that governs the position of Gondwana relative to the pole, that governs the atmospheric CO2 concentration that is slowly, over millions of years, declining to a value that will tip the planet into its next great cold interval. Physics does not care about the reef. Physics does not know about the trilobites. The universe is not indifferent to this Ordovician ocean, in the sense of having considered it and decided not to intervene. It is indifferent in the more fundamental sense of operating by rules that were established long before the first cell divided in any ocean anywhere, and that operate without any awareness of the consequences they produce. The beauty of the reef is real. The impermanence of the reef is real. Both of these things are real simultaneously, and neither one negates the other. Rest in the warm water. Let the afternoon light do its work on the reef face. Let the slight cooler current pass through you and continue on its way northward, carrying its message from the south in a language that nothing in this ocean is equipped to read. The evening will come here as it comes everywhere, gradually without announcement, the light changing from gold to orange to the violet of tropical dusk, the surface cooling slightly, the creatures of the upper water column beginning the small behavioural shifts that distinguish their daytime routine from their nighttime one. There is still time before the evening. There is still time to drift along the reef edge, to descend again through the water column, to let the current take you where it will in this warm and ancient sea. The afternoon holds. The reef continues its slow construction. The trilobites are still at work on the seafloor below, crossing and recrossing the terrain in their patient way, and they will continue long after the sun has set and the stars have appeared in the Ordovician sky, stars that are present but unnamed, in a sky that no one will look up at tonight with enough cognitive complexity to wonder what they mean. The tectonic processes that are moving Gondwana toward the South Pole are slow by any human standard, but they have been operating continuously for longer than the Ordovician period has existed. The supercontinent that Gondwana represents, an aggregation of what will become South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, the Indian subcontinent and several smaller fragments, has been assembled over hundreds of millions of years from pieces that were once separate, and it is now beginning the long process of drifting southward that will bring its southern margin into the polar region and initiate the glaciation. The plate tectonics of the Ordovician world are, in their broad outlines, the same processes that drive the modern world: the slow movement of the rigid outer plates of the Earth over the more plastic material of the mantle below, driven by the convection currents that arise from the decay of radioactive elements deep within the planet. The heat of the Earth's interior is the engine that drives continental drift, and that heat has been driving it since long before the Ordovician, and will continue to drive it long after the Ordovician ends. The continents move at rates of centimetres per year, the speed of a growing fingernail, and over tens of millions of years, those centimetres add up to thousands of kilometres. In the Ordovician, the consequences of this drift for the climate are profound. Gondwana's movement toward the pole removes a large area of continental surface from the tropics and places it in higher latitudes where the solar energy input is lower. Ice can form on land at high latitudes even when the global average temperature is warm. Because the seasonal extremes are more pronounced at the poles, the polar winter receives almost no sunlight, and if the summer is not warm enough to melt the winter's ice and snow accumulation, the ice persists from year to year and grows. As Gondwana moves southward, the conditions for this kind of persistent glaciation are increasingly met on its southern margin. The ocean responds to this glaciation in ways that ripple outward from the glaciated zone. The growth of ice sheets on land removes water from the ocean. Water evaporates from the sea surface, falls as snow on the glaciated continent, and is locked up in glacial ice rather than returning to the ocean through runoff. As the ice sheets grow, sea level falls. The shallow continental shelves that are currently covered by the warm, productive water you have been exploring become exposed land as the sea retreats. The reef that has been building here for millions of years may find itself above sea level, exposed to the air, unable to survive without the water that is its medium. But not yet. The sea level is not falling today. The reef is still covered by this warm tropical water, still building its slow structure, still hosting its community of trilobites and brachiopods and crinoids, and the occasional visiting nautiloid. The glaciation is beginning somewhere to the south, in the cold that is accumulating on a continent that has not yet crossed the polar threshold, but it has not yet reached this part of the world with anything more than a fractional shift in water temperature. The reef does not know what is coming. The reef does not know anything. But it is here, and it is real, and it is building, and for now that is enough. The sun has set on the Ordovician. You did not see it set. You were below the surface, in the middle of the water column watching the graptolites drift. but you can see the evidence of it now in the changing quality of the light above you. The shimmering boundary between water and air has gone dark, no longer a mirror of gold and orange, but a dark membrane through which the first faint stars are just becoming visible if you look up through the water at exactly the right angle. The photic zone above you has not become dark. The moon is rising, and in this ancient world the moon is slightly larger in apparent size than the modern moon, slightly closer to Earth, and its light is sufficient to cast faint shadows even here at the upper edge of the water column. The night ocean is different, not dramatically different. The creatures of the seafloor do not change their behaviour between day and night in any fundamental way, being largely non-visual and therefore not particularly dependent on the light-dark cycle. But there are differences, if you know where to look and what to attend to. The zooplankton of the surface zone migrate downward at night, descending to depths where they are safer from the visual predators of the surface water, and rising again at dawn to feed in the phytoplankton-rich upper layer. This vertical migration, the daily up and down cycling of billions of small organisms through the water column, is one of the largest animal migrations on Earth in any geological period, and it is happening now, above you, the zooplankton descending through the darkened water in a slow, continuous shower. The nautiloids have noticed. The ones that hunt in the surface zone during the day have followed the zooplankton downward, and in the middle water column where you are now positioned, there are more nautiloids than there were during the afternoon. They move through the water in their unhurried way, tentacles extended, taking advantage of the concentration of prey that the vertical migration has produced at this depth. The competition between the nautiloids and whatever other predators inhabit this zone creates a subtle tension in the water, not the dramatic violence of a predation event, but the low-level alertness of multiple animals occupying the same space with the same objective. But what you notice most in the Ordovician night is the light, not the sunlight which is gone, not the moonlight which reaches this depth only as the faintest silver tinge at the very top of your visual field. What you notice is the bioluminescence, the cold light produced by living organisms for reasons that are various and not always fully understood, but that produce, in this dark water, a display of such quiet beauty that the word beauty seems almost inadequate to the task of describing it. Bacteria are the primary producers of bioluminescence in this ocean. They are present in vast numbers in the water column, and at night, when the chemical signals that suppress their light production in daytime are absent, they glow. Individually, the glow of a single bacterium is undetectable by human eyes, but when they are present in the concentrations that characterize the productive Ordovician water column, their collective glow is visible as a faint diffuse luminosity in the water, not a light you could read by, not a light that illuminates objects, but a light that reveals the water itself as something other than darkness. And the bacteria are not alone. Other organisms produce bioluminescence in the Ordovician. Various protists, perhaps some of the early Kundarians, organisms that use light for purposes ranging from defense to predator attraction to communication between individuals of the same species. In the modern ocean, bioluminescence is widespread among organisms of many kinds, and there is no reason to think it was less widespread in the Ordovician, given that the chemistry that produces it, the oxidation of a class of compounds called luciferins by the enzyme luciferase, is biochemically simple enough to have evolved multiple times in multiple lineages. You float in this light. It is not warm. Bioluminescent light produces almost no heat, the reaction being extraordinarily efficient in its conversion of chemical energy to photons rather than infrared radiation. It is cold light, blue-green in colour for reasons that have to do with the physics of water and the evolutionary pressures that have shaped the chemistry of the reaction over the organism's history. Cold and blue-green and faint and everywhere. In the water above you and below you and to each side, a light that seems to come from the water itself rather than from any source. A quality of luminosity that is intrinsic to the medium rather than imposed upon it. What would the Ordovician night look like from the surface? If you could rise above the water and look out across this tropical sea in the darkness after the moon has set and the stars are fully out, you would see the ocean glowing faintly from within. Not spectacularly. Not the way that a modern algal bloom in the tropics sometimes produces dramatic blue flashes in the bow wave of a ship. More subtly, a diffuse glow that makes the sea surface slightly brighter than the surrounding air, that gives the waves a faint luminous outline as they curl and break, that creates the impression that the ocean is lit from below by some deep and patient source, that has been burning since before the night began. The stars above are different too, not in their positions. The individual stars are mostly too distant for the 45 million years of the Ordovician period to have moved them significantly relative to each other. But the Milky Way is different, younger by the same measure, and the sky is different in the absence of any light pollution from any civilization, any city, any fire lit by any hand on any beach. It is a darkness that has never been interrupted by human light, and in that uninterrupted darkness the stars are present in their full number, dense enough in the band of the galactic plane to be almost overwhelming in their quiet abundance. But you are in the water, not above it, and the stars are visible only through the surface film as a faint wavering scatter of points that resolve and dissolve as the surface moves. What you have is the bioluminescence and the darkness and the faint movement of water around you, and these are sufficient, more than sufficient. They are exactly what this moment requires. The trilobites on the seafloor below are navigating this same darkness, though they experience it differently, not as darkness at all perhaps, since their compound eyes have a different sensitivity to light than yours, and the faint bioluminescent glow of the water column may be more significant to them than it seems from your perspective. Or perhaps they navigate this terrain entirely by chemoreception and mechanoreception, their eyes playing a smaller role in their nighttime ecology than they do during the day when the visual contrast between the illuminated and shadowed seafloor provides useful information about the topography. There is something about the darkness and the bioluminescence together that changes the quality of being here. The world has simplified. The rich visual complexity of the daytime seafloor, the colours and textures and shapes that distinguished one organism from another, one zone from another, has been replaced by something more uniform, more all-encompassing. The dark water holds everything and reveals nothing clearly, and in that holding there is a kind of equality between things that were distinct in the daylight. The Brachiopod and the Trilobite and the graptolite and the stromatoporoid mound are all equally invisible in the dark, equally present, equally part of the same unified darkness that the bioluminescence touches here and there with its cold suggestion of illumination. You do not feel alone here. This is perhaps surprising. In the deep water, in the darkness, far from any shore, far from any other human presence that has ever existed or will exist for another 460 million years. And yet the not aloneness is real and specific. It comes from the bioluminescence, perhaps, from the evidence it provides of life surrounding you in every direction. It comes from the movement of the water, from the way that movement tells you the water is not empty. It comes from whatever faint vibrations reach you from the larger animals moving through this zone. The nautiloids, the graptolite colonies drifting past, the large soft-bodied animals whose presence is registered by the water before they become visible. You are surrounded by life. You have always been surrounded by life since you first descended into this ocean. The Ordovician is not a dead or simplified world, not a world still learning how to be complex. It is a mature ecosystem, the product of hundreds of millions of years of biological evolution and ecological refinement, and its maturity is expressed not in the dramatic violence of predation events or the spectacular diversity of later geological periods, but in the quiet, intricate, patient productivity of a world that has been doing exactly what it does for longer than you can comfortably imagine. Let the bioluminescence surround you, let the dark water hold you, the moon will rise again, and the sun will follow, and the daytime Ordovician ocean will return with its warm light and its visible diversity and its quiet drama. But for now, in the night, in the cold blue-green light of a billion bacteria going about their ancient chemical business, let the world simply be dark and full of life and as old as it is, which is very old, which is older than anything you have ever seen or touched or imagined in your waking hours. The current is gentle at night. The water moves but does not pull. Something large passes through the water perhaps 20 meters to your left, a large nautiloid, its shell pale in the bioluminescent water, moving with the slow certainty of an animal that knows its place in this ecosystem completely. You watch it until it fades back into the darkness, and then you watch the place where it was, where the bioluminescence it disturbed is still slowly settling back into its former pattern, and then you let even that small evidence of its passage dissolve, and you are alone again in the beautiful cold ancient darkness of the Ordovician night. The moon of the Ordovician night is closer to the earth than the modern moon is. This is a consequence of the tidal interaction between the Earth and the Moon. The Earth's rotation applies a slight forward torque on the Moon through tidal friction, which causes the Moon to slowly spiral outward from the Earth over geological time. In the Ordovician, the Moon has not yet spiraled as far as it will by the present day, and it appears slightly larger in the sky, and exerts slightly stronger tidal forces on the ocean below. The tides of the Ordovician are somewhat stronger than modern tides as a result. The tidal range, the difference between high and low water, is greater in many locations, and the tidal currents that sweep across the continental shelves twice daily are correspondingly stronger. This has implications for the organisms that live in the intertidal zone, the region between the highest high tide and the lowest low tide, which is periodically exposed to the air. In the Ordovician, this zone is probably colonized by the earliest pioneering organisms on land. The primitive lichens and algae and fungal crusts that are beginning, the biological colonization of the continents, and the stronger tidal fluctuations mean that the organisms in this zone are subject to more frequent and more dramatic alternations between aquatic and aerial conditions. But in the open ocean, away from the shore, the tidal effects are less dramatic. The rise and fall of the sea surface over a tidal cycle far from land is a gentle thing. A slow rise and a slow fall that takes approximately 12 hours in each direction, and produces no visible disturbance to the surface beyond the very slight change in water level. The organisms of the water column experience the tidal current as a shift in the direction and strength of the horizontal flow, which affects where they end up relative to where they started, but which is not experienced as anything so dramatic as a wave or a disturbance. You lie on the surface of the Ordovician Ocean in the dark and feel the tidal current shift slightly around you, the water moving in a different direction for a time, carrying you a small distance from where you were, then settling back into a new direction as the tidal cycle advances. The bioluminescence in the water around you flickers slightly as the current change disturbs the organisms producing it. Some of them have their bioluminescent reactions triggered by mechanical disturbance, and the change in current constitutes a mild mechanical stimulus. For a moment the water around you is slightly brighter, a soft cold glow that brightens and then fades over several minutes as the disturbed organisms settle back into their chemical equilibrium. The stars above, visible through the surface film, are the stars of the Ordovician sky, not meaningfully different from the stars of the modern sky in their positions, though the precise configuration of the constellations is slightly different because the proper motion of individual stars has not yet moved them to where they will be 460 million years from now. The star patterns you see here are not the patterns that any human culture has named, because no human culture has ever seen these exact patterns. They have never been organized into myths or used for navigation, or written about in any language. They are simply stars, burning, ancient, the same stars that have been burning since before the Earth formed, and their light falls on the Ordovician Ocean without any of the meaning that human cultures will eventually attach to it. There are things in this ocean that you cannot see, not because they are in the wrong place, not because the light is insufficient or the distance too great, but because they are soft. Their bodies are composed of materials that do not preserve well in the sediment. No calcium carbonate, no silica, no organic compounds that can withstand the transformations that sediment undergoes over hundreds of millions of years. When they die, they decompose. When they decompose, they leave nothing, or almost nothing, and perhaps a trace in the sediment, the ghost of a burrow, the shadow of a body pressed briefly into the mud before the decomposers arrived, but nothing that can be lifted from a quarry wall 460 million years later and said, "This was a living thing, and it had this shape, and it moved in this way." The soft-bodied fauna of the Ordovician Ocean is largely invisible to science, and therefore largely invisible to you, since your knowledge of this world is built from the fossil record that science has accumulated. You know the creatures that left hard parts. You know the trilobites and the brachiopods and the stromatoporoids and the nautiloids. You know the graptolites because their organic-walled colonies sometimes preserve in the fine black shale of the Ordovician deep. But the creatures that were made only of flesh and protein, and the soft tissues that decompose without trace, those are the great unknown of this world, and they may have been numerous, may have been important, may have occupied ecological roles that we cannot even identify because the organisms that filled them have left no record. What might they have been? Speculation is all that is available, and even that speculation must be constrained by what we know about the evolutionary possibilities of the period. There were, almost certainly, soft-bodied worms of many kinds. The Ordovician sediment is full of trace fossils that indicate burrowing organisms of various sizes and behaviours, and the organisms that made those traces are often invisible in the body fossil record. There were, almost certainly, jellyfish or jellyfish-like creatures in the water column. The basic cnidarian body plan had existed since at least the late Proterozoic, and jellyfish leave almost no trace in the fossil record except under extraordinary conditions of preservation. And there may have been organisms for which we have no category at all, body plans that evolved in the early Ordovician and went extinct at the end of the period, leaving no descendants and no useful trace, leaving only the blank space in the ecosystem where their ecological role was and the traces of their passage through the sediment. The Cambrian period, which preceded the Ordovician, produced an extraordinary diversity of body plans that are not captured by any of the known animal phyla, organisms of such unusual morphology that placing them within the familiar taxonomic categories requires considerable interpretive effort, and sometimes cannot be done at all. There is no particular reason to think the Ordovician was different in this regard, and every reason to think that the soft-bodied fauna of this period included things that would surprise even the most experienced paleontologist. You float in the water of this mystery. It is a comfortable place to float. The water is still warm, the current still gentle, the bioluminescence still present in the darkness around you. And somewhere in this water, perhaps close enough to touch if touching were possible here, there are organisms that will never be catalogued, never be named, never be depicted in any field guide or documentary or museum exhibit. They are present and alive and going about their complete sufficient lives, and the only evidence that they exist is the chemical composition of the water they are displacing as they move, and the slight turbulence their passage leaves in the current, and the traces they will press into the sediment when they die. This is humbling in a particular way. The history of life on Earth is, in significant part, the history of the things that were preserved, an accidental archive created not by any intent to remember, but by the physical properties of calcium and silica, and the conditions under which sediment becomes rock. The things that were not preserved are part of that history too, perhaps the larger part, and their absence from the record is not the same as their absence from the world. They were here. They were alive. They were part of the ecosystem that produced the organisms we do know about, and we cannot fully understand the organisms we know without understanding the context in which they lived, and that context includes all the unnamed things that the fossil record has not kept. A soft body brushes past you in the darkness. You feel it in the way you feel the current, not directly, but as a slight displacement of water, a ripple in the medium around you that indicates the passage of something solid enough to push the water aside as it moves. It is there, and then it is gone, and you cannot say what it was or what it was doing or where it was going. It left no trace except the water it displaced, and that trace is already dispersing, diffusing outward through the surrounding ocean, becoming indistinguishable from the random motion of the molecules that constitute this ancient sea. What was it? A large worm, perhaps? The Ordovician sediment records the traces of very large burrowing organisms whose identity is unknown. A soft-bodied predator, hunting in the dark water column by chemoreception, or mechanoreception, as invisible to its prey as it is to you. A creature with no modern equivalent, not a worm and not a mollusk and not a cnidarian, but something else. Something that existed only in this window of geological time, and left only the memory of this displaced water to mark its passage through the world. You will never know, and there is something in that not knowing that is itself worth attending to. The world is full of things that will not be known, things that happened in places and times outside the reach of any record, outside the reach of any observer. The Ordovician is a world of such things, not just the soft-bodied organisms, but also the experiences of the organisms that did leave fossils, the inner weather of the nautiloid's small brain, the experience, if it was an experience, of the Trilobite's enrollment defense, the chemical messages that passed between organisms in this water and were interpreted by whatever processing systems those organisms possessed and acted upon in ways that the fossil record can only gesture toward obliquely. There is a tradition in contemplative practice of sitting with what is unknown without filling the unknown with invented content. Not to construct a comfortable story about what you cannot see, but to remain with the fact of not seeing, to let the not knowing be what it is without the discomfort that usually attaches to it in waking life. This ocean is an excellent place for that practice. Almost everything in it is unknown in one sense or another. The inner lives of its inhabitants, the details of its soft-bodied fauna, the precise chemistry of the deep water, the specifics of how the organisms you have observed interact with one another over the course of a year or a decade or a century. The known things are remarkable, and the unknown things are at least as numerous, and both the known and the unknown are present in the same water, in the same moment, indifferent to the distinction. The night is advancing. The bioluminescence is, if anything, slightly brighter than it was earlier. Some algal species in the surface water have been disturbed by the movements of zooplankton during the vertical migration, and their light-producing biochemistry has been triggered, adding their cold glow to the ambient luminosity. The overall effect is of a water column that contains its own slow, sourceless light, a light that does not illuminate in any useful way but that transforms the darkness from a mere absence into a presence, a dark that has a quality to it, a texture, a depth. You think about what it means to be a creature adapted entirely to this darkness, not temporarily in the dark the way you are, a visitor from a light-adapted existence, experiencing the dark as a condition that will end when you choose to ascend to the surface or wait for dawn, but permanently adapted to it, with sensory systems calibrated to the chemical and mechanical information of the dark ocean, with a nervous system that processes that information and produces behavior appropriate to it, with a body that is shaped by the evolutionary history of millions of generations living in conditions like these. The darkness would not be darkness to such an organism. It would simply be the world, as complete and navigable as your daylit world is to you. The chemical gradients would be as legible as road signs. The mechanical vibrations of the water would tell the story of everything moving within range of detection. The organism would not experience the absence of light as deprivation, any more than you experience the absence of echolocation as deprivation. You have simply never possessed it, and your world is entirely adequate without it. Whatever brushed past you in the darkness has not returned. The water is still again in that particular location, the disturbance of its passage fully dissipated into the surrounding ocean. You hold the memory of it, the slight pressure change, the momentary alteration of the current, as the most direct encounter you have had with the soft-bodied unknown of the Ordovician, and you are content with it as an encounter. It was real. It was brief. It left nothing behind but the knowledge that something was there, and that knowledge is enough. The dawn will come eventually, or just it always does, even in the Ordovician, even in this tropical sea where the night is longer than you are accustomed to because the day is shorter in this geological period, the Earth's rotation slightly faster, the day and night cycles completed in 21 or 22 hours rather than the 24 you know. The sky above the surface will lighten gradually from the east, the first paleness appearing perhaps an hour before the sun actually rises, and when it does rise it will arrive with the same sudden warmth it always brings to tropical water, the light penetrating quickly through the surface and spreading down through the photic zone, triggering the first photosynthetic responses of the phytoplankton, setting the day's biological machinery in motion once more. But the night is not finished yet. The bioluminescence still drifts in the water column. The soft-bodied unknown still moves through the darkness in whatever direction its sensory systems are directing it. The nautiloids still hunt. The trilobites still cross the seafloor in their careful, inexhaustible way. And you still float in the dark, warm water of an ocean that has never been named, among creatures that will one day be fossils in a limestone cliff or a quarry wall, present in this moment with no knowledge of any future at all. The concept of an unknown organism, something that exists but has left no record that allows us to know it, is in some ways more interesting than the known organisms of the Ordovician fossil record. The known organisms are remarkable, but they are known. They have been studied, described, placed in taxonomic systems, their morphology analysed and their ecology inferred from the context in which they are found. They have been given names, the Latinate binomials of scientific nomenclature, the informal common names that writers use when explaining them to general audiences. The known organisms have a kind of existence in human knowledge that is different from their existence in the Ordovician Ocean, a second existence as the subject of scientific understanding. The unknown organisms have no such second existence. They are present only in the Ordovician, only here, only now. And when this ocean ends, when the extinction removes or transforms the world that currently surrounds you, they will end completely. There will be no fossils to find, no rock record to read, no basis on which to reconstruct their forms or infer their ecologies. They will simply cease, taking with them whatever it was they were, whatever shapes they had, whatever roles they played, whatever relationships they maintained with the other organisms of this world, and the loss will not be registered by any record because there is no record of what was lost. This is not a melancholy thought, not necessarily. It is a thought about the completeness of the present. Whatever these unknown, soft-bodied organisms are, they are fully here, fully present, fully engaged in the business of living in this ocean. They do not experience their future absence. They do not know that they will leave no record. They are as complete and as sufficient in their existence as any organism that will eventually find its way into the geological record and be studied by paleontologists in a future that does not yet exist. The quality of their aliveness is not diminished by the fact that it will not be remembered. There is something in this that applies beyond the Ordovician. Most of what has ever lived has left no record. Most individual organisms that have ever existed are not in any fossil bed anywhere on Earth. They decomposed, they were consumed, their molecules were recycled into other organisms without leaving any durable trace of their individual existence. The fossil record is a sample, and not even a random sample. It is biased toward organisms with hard parts, toward organisms that lived in environments where preservation is possible, toward organisms from periods that have not yet been fully subducted or metamorphosed, or eroded away. What we know of the history of life is the visible tip of a much larger and mostly invisible body of reality. And yet the visible tip is extraordinary. The Trilobites, and the Brachiopods, and the Nautiloids, and the graptolites that will eventually be preserved are extraordinary things, and their preservation is a kind of gift from the past to the future, even though no one chose to give it. The organisms did not intend to be fossils. The sediment did not intend to preserve them. The geological processes that turn the sediment to rock did not intend to create an archive. But the result of all this unintended process is that we know something, not everything, not even most things, but something real and significant about the world that you are currently inhabiting. The gift is imperfect and accidental and incomplete and invaluable. The darkness is changing. It happens so slowly that there is no single moment you can point to and say, "There, that was when it began." It begins everywhere simultaneously, or it begins nowhere in particular and arrives everywhere at once. The way the end of sleep arrives, not as a threshold crossed, but as a quality that shifts, something that was one thing becoming gradually and unmistakably something else. The water above you is lighter. Not bright, not yet, but lighter, in the way that dark grey is lighter than black, in the way that the approach of something illuminated distinguishes itself from the presence of pure darkness. The dawn of the Ordovician is not accompanied by birdsong. There are no birds, and there will not be for another 400 million years. There are no insects making their morning sounds, no frogs calling from the shallow water margins of ponds and lakes that may or may not exist on the bare Ordovician coast. There is no wind in the trees because there are no trees, and the wind that crosses the land crosses a surface of bare rock and thin mineral soil in silence, meeting no resistance that would produce any sound a human ear could register as pleasant or recognizable. What the dawn is accompanied by in this ocean is a change in the zooplankton. The vertical migration that brought them down into the middle water column during the night is reversing. They are rising now, drawn upward by the increasing light that signals the return of the phytoplankton's productive period, and the rising of the zooplankton is a slow, dispersed event that happens across the entire water column simultaneously. Not a march, not a parade, just a gradual shift in the distribution of small organisms in the water, the average depth of their presence moving upward by tens of meters over the course of an hour. The nautiloids that followed them down have noticed. They are rising too, some of them. The ones that have been hunting the zooplankton through the night are following their prey back toward the surface, their shells tilting upward as they adjust their buoyancy to rise with the morning migration. Others remain at depth, settling into the semi-active state that serves as sleep for an organism that does not sleep in any recognizable sense. A reduction in metabolic rate, a slowing of the siphon pumping that provides locomotion, a period of relative stillness during which the nautiloid drifts with the current, rather than directing its own passage through the water. Below you, On the seafloor, the trilobites have not stopped. They do not have a circadian rhythm in the full sense that many modern animals do. The chemical clock that synchronizes biological processes to the light-dark cycle had not yet achieved in the Ordovician the complexity it will reach in later evolutionary history. The trilobites of the seafloor have been moving through the night as they move through the day, crossing the sediment in their patient way, following gradients toward food, enrolled briefly when disturbances triggered their defense response, extending their antennae into the water to sample whatever chemistry the current was carrying past them. But the light reaching the seafloor is different now than it was an hour ago, and some of the trilobite species respond to this difference. The ones with the most developed photoreceptors, the species whose compound eyes are most sensitive to the intensity and direction of light, have adjusted their trajectories slightly, moving in directions that the morning light makes more legible than the night made them. They are using vision again, or beginning to use it, after the night in which they relied more heavily on other senses. The transition is not dramatic. It is simply the gradual re-engagement of a sensory system, as the conditions that make it useful are restored. The reef is waking too. Not waking in any literal sense. The organisms of the reef do not sleep, most of them, and the stromatoporoids and brachiopods have been filtering and growing through the night exactly as they filtered and grew during the day. But the reef looks different in the morning light. The angle of the light is different, coming from the east at a shallower angle than the noon sun, and this shallower angle creates longer shadows within the reef structure, emphasizes the three-dimensional complexity of its surface, makes the irregular topography more legible to a watching eye. The reef in morning light looks more sculptural than it did at noon, more clearly a built thing, a structure with depth and shadow and the particular beauty of something that has been made by accumulation over a very long time. The phytoplankton have responded to the light immediately. Their photosynthetic machinery, built from proteins that are sensitive to light intensity and that can shift between active and inactive states within minutes, is already running at increasing capacity as the sun's angle rises and the intensity of the light penetrating the surface zone increases. The oxygen they produce is dissolving into the water around them. Not much, not enough to change the overall oxygen concentration of the ocean in a measurable way today, but added to yesterday's production and last year's production, and the production of the last 10 million years, it has changed everything. The oxygen in this ocean is, in significant part, the product of the accumulated photosynthesis of these organisms over geological time. You rise with the morning. You've been in the water for what feels like a full day and a night, though the experience of time in this place has been different from the experience of time you are accustomed to. Slower in some ways, faster in others, measured not by clocks but by the changing light and the slow movements of organisms and the gradual transitions from one zone to another as you drifted and descended and rose again. The Ordovician Ocean does not have hours in any sense that matters to the organisms that inhabit it. It has light and dark, warm and cold, near and far, shallow and deep. These are the categories in which its residents navigate their world, and they are sufficient. The surface approaches. The light above the water is strengthening rapidly as the sun clears whatever horizon applies to this particular location on this particular morning, and the warm gold that characterized the tropical Ordovician afternoon of the previous day is returning, modified by the freshness of morning. A quality of light that seems cleaner than the afternoon light, less settled, less established, more provisional in the way that all mornings are provisional, carrying in their brightness the implicit possibility that the day could go any number of ways from here. You break the surface, or, more precisely, you arrive at the surface, since breaking is too energetic a word for the gradual transition that brings you from the water into the air. The air is warm, as tropical air always is in the morning, before the day has had time to accumulate its full heat. It smells of salt and the very faint biological sweetness of the phytoplankton, the same smell that the ocean surface has carried through all of its history and will carry through the rest of it, the molecular signature of photosynthesis occurring at the boundary between sea and sky. The horizon is present in every direction, a clean, sharp line between the dark blue of the Ordovician Ocean and the paler blue of the Ordovician sky. No ships, no coastlines visible, no clouds at this moment, though clouds will build over the water through the day as the surface warms and the convection begins. Just the ocean and the sky and the line between them, and the sun rising in the east with the same certainty it has had since the Earth formed, since the solar system condensed from its cloud of gas and dust, since the physics that governs nuclear fusion began producing light at this star's core. The Sun in the Ordovician is, in absolute terms, slightly cooler than it will be in 460 million years. Stars evolve. Our Sun is a main sequence star that slowly brightens over billions of years as the hydrogen in its core is converted to helium and the fusion reactions adjust to maintain equilibrium. In the Ordovician, the Sun is approximately 4% less luminous than it is in the present day. This difference is small but significant. It is one of the reasons why the high greenhouse gas concentrations of the Ordovician atmosphere are necessary to maintain the warm temperatures of this ocean. Without the extra warming from elevated CO2 and other greenhouse gases, the slightly dimmer Sun would allow the Earth's surface to be significantly colder than it is. The morning sky of the Ordovician is clear blue, as it will be throughout the day unless clouds form. The blue is exactly the colour that the scattering of sunlight by a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere produces, the same blue that the modern sky shows. This is one of the few aspects of the Ordovician world that would look entirely familiar to a modern observer. The blue sky and the dark blue ocean, and the white foam on the wave crests. Everything else is strange. But the sky and the sea are the sky and the sea, and their colours are what they have always been. The first waves of the day catch the morning light on their crests and scatter it in 1,000 small reflections. The ocean surface is not rough, a moderate swell from somewhere to the east, probably the product of winds far out in the open ocean, rolls in gentle succession and breaks in quiet foam at the top of each crest, before the wave face rolls forward and the energy is transmitted to the next wave in the sequence. The rhythm of it, the arrival and passing of each wave, the slight rise and fall that you feel as each one passes beneath you, is as ancient as any rhythm in the world, as old as the ocean itself, as constant as anything that the earth has produced. Let yourself rise and fall with the waves. Let the morning light warm whatever surface of you faces the east. The Ordovician day is beginning its 22-hour cycle, and the ocean below you is already fully engaged in the business of being alive, the phytoplankton photosynthesizing, the zooplankton rising to feed on them, the trilobites crossing the sediment below, the reef building its slow calcium carbonate structure, grain by grain, the nautiloids adjusting their buoyancy for the day's hunting, the graptolites drifting in the middle water column, the soft-bodied unknown of the deeper zones going about their invisible commerce in the darkness far below. Everything is continuing, everything is already in progress. You arrived in the middle of a story that was already millions of chapters old, and you are leaving it still in mid-sentence, still mid-event, still engaged in the ordinary and extraordinary business of being the Ordovician ocean. Nothing pauses for your departure. Nothing will mark the moment when you are no longer present here. The waves will continue to roll in from the east. The light will continue to warm the surface. The life below will continue to cycle through its exchanges of energy and matter and chemical information. And the morning will become noon, and noon will become afternoon, and the afternoon will become another Ordovician night. And in that night the bioluminescence will return, and the soft-bodied unknown will move through the dark water, and the trilobites will cross the seafloor in the dark as they crossed it in the light, and nothing in this ocean will know that you were ever here. The morning current is different from the nighttime current. During the night, the surface of the ocean was relatively calm. The absence of solar heating reduced the convective processes that create vertical mixing, and the horizontal currents were driven primarily by the large-scale circulation patterns of the ocean basin, rather than by the local effects of wind and heating. With the morning sun, the dynamics change. The surface water warms faster than the water below it, creating a temperature gradient that drives convection. Warm water rising, cooler water below it moving in to replace it. A slow churning of the upper water column that begins as soon as the sun is high enough to heat the surface significantly. The organisms of the upper water column experience this as a change in the current's character, more variable, more turbulent in its small-scale structure, carrying the food particles of the phytoplankton layer in more complex patterns than the smooth laminar flow of the nighttime water. The zooplankton that have risen with the dawn from their nighttime depths find themselves in this more energetic, food-rich environment, and their feeding rates increase accordingly. The physical mixing that the convection creates distributes the phytoplankton more evenly through the upper water column. bringing cells that had sunk overnight back into the illuminated zone where they can resume photosynthesis. The dawn is a metabolic event as much as it is an optical one. Every organism in the upper water column responds to it in some way. The phytoplankton through photosynthesis, the zooplankton through feeding and positioning, the larger predators through the opportunities created by the concentration of prey in the productive surface layer. The reef below responds more slowly. The sessile organisms there cannot reposition themselves to take advantage of the morning conditions, but they benefit indirectly from the increased organic particle production above, as those particles eventually settle through the water column to reach their level. The trilobites on the seafloor have been active throughout the night and continue their activity through the morning without any dramatic change in behaviour. Their activity rhythm is not synchronized to the light-dark cycle in the way that many modern animals' behaviour is synchronized to it, or if it is, the synchronization is subtle enough that it is not visible in the sediment record. What drives the trilobite is the distribution of food in its environment, and the distribution of food is driven by the complex interplay of physics and biology that makes the Ordovician seafloor productive, and that interplay is continuous, operating through day and night and dawn without any clear on-off switch that would produce a sharp behavioural boundary. You watch the light strengthen above the surface and feel the morning take hold of the ocean around you. It is a process, not an event. The morning does not arrive, it accumulates, each increment of increasing light adding to what has already been accumulated, each degree of warming water building on the warming that preceded it. This is the pace of all large processes, not the discrete arrival of a new state, but the continuous progression through a gradient that has no sharp edges, that is always in motion, always becoming what it is becoming without ever quite being fully arrived. The ocean you've been inhabiting will not disappear quickly. Oceans do not disappear quickly. They change, they shift, they transgress across the continents during warm periods and retreat during cold ones. They alter their chemistry and their circulation patterns in response to the tectonic movements of the plates and the fluctuations of the atmospheric gases that determine the planet's temperature. But they persist. The Ordovician ocean will not dry up overnight or vanish in a catastrophe. It will transform slowly and inexorably into something different, colder during the glaciation, shallower as the ice sheets lock up sea level, different in its biological character as the extinction removes the species that currently populate it, and new species evolve to fill the spaces left behind. What it will leave is rock. The calcium carbonate of the Brachiopod shells, and the stromatoporoid skeletons and the nautiloid shells and the trilobite exoskeletons will, over the millions of years that follow, be compressed and cemented and transformed into limestone. The fine sediment of the deep seafloor will become shale. The reef structures will become the limestone formations that today make up the Ordovician strata, exposed in quarries and road cuts and eroded hillsides on every continent. The story of this ocean is written in rock, and the rock is readable, and humans have been reading it for 2 centuries of scientific effort and have pieced together, from the evidence preserved in that rock, the world that you are currently inhabiting. Consider that process for a moment. The trilobite that is crossing the seafloor below you right now will die, eventually, and its exoskeleton will settle into the sediment, and over millions of years it will be buried by more sediment and compressed and altered and eventually turned to stone. And then, 460 million years from now, in a limestone quarry in what will then be called Ontario, or in a road cut in what will then be called Ohio, or in the shale of a hillside in what will then be called Bohemia, a geologist will find that trilobite, compressed and altered but recognizable, its compound eyes intact in the calcium carbonate matrix, its antennae perhaps preserved as faint impressions in the surrounding rock, and will extract it carefully with a hammer and a chisel, and will look at it with a magnifying lens, and will identify the species, and will add it to the scientific record of Ordovician life, and will use it to help reconstruct the world that you're visiting right now. The circularity of this is not lost on you, drifting on the surface of an ocean that is simultaneously the subject of the fossil record and the living reality behind it. You are here because scientists studied the fossils that this ocean will produce, and those fossils are being produced right now in real time as the organisms around you live their lives and die their deaths and contribute their hard parts to the growing accumulation of material that will one day become the rock that makes those scientists' work possible. The knowledge and the object of the knowledge are in a relationship that loops around on itself, and the loop is long, 460 million years long, but it is a loop nonetheless. The graptolites are particularly important in this story. Their organic walled colonies, when they die and settle into the fine sediment of the deep sea floor, preserve beautifully in certain conditions, in the black shale that forms from roonoxic deep water sediment, where the absence of oxygen prevents the decomposition that would otherwise destroy their organic material. Graptolite fossils are found in Ordovician shales around the world, and they are the primary tool that paleontologists use to establish the chronology of the Ordovician period, to correlate rock layers from one continent to another, to build the timeline of the 45 million years that this period represents. Every stratum of Ordovician rock has its characteristic graptolite fauna, the particular species present in that layer, nowhere else, calibrated by millions of years of evolutionary change to a particular interval of geological time. By knowing the graptolite species present in a rock layer, a paleontologist can determine with considerable confidence when that layer was deposited, how deep the water was, how warm or cold the climate was, what the circulation of the ocean was doing at that time. The graptolites that are drifting around you in the current are writing history in the only language available to them, the language of their bodies, their presence in particular water at a particular time, and that history will be readable, imperfectly but genuinely, by human eyes 460 million years from now. There is something quietly moving about this, about the idea that these small colonial organisms with no nervous system, no awareness of their own existence, no capacity for intention or meaning, are nonetheless producing something that will eventually communicate information across the deepest gap in time that the human mind can contemplate. Not intentionally, not as a gift to the future, simply as a consequence of being alive and dying and settling and being transformed. The communication is accidental in every specific sense, and yet so reliable that science depends on it. The graptolite does not know it is leaving a message. The message is left anyway. The brachiopods on the reef will leave their messages too. Their shells are thick and well mineralized, and they preserve with exceptional fidelity in the limestone matrix. The ridges and ribs on their surfaces, the configuration of the hinge, the proportions of the two valves, all of these details will be readable in the fossil, and from those details a paleontologist will be able to determine the species, the ecological preferences of that species, the water depth and temperature and chemistry that it inhabited, the community of other organisms it lived alongside. The brachiopod will have been dead for 460 million years, and it will still be legible, it will still be telling its story. What story is it telling right now while it is alive? It is telling the story of an organism in equilibrium with its environment, filtering the right water at the right temperature at the right depth, exchanging its metabolic wastes for the nutrients it needs, growing at the rate that the available energy supports, existing in the dense community of other brachiopods and bryozoans and crinoids that makes this reef one of the most productive biological communities in the Ordovician Ocean. It is a story of sufficiency, not triumph, not struggle, not narrative arc in the literary sense, but sufficiency. The organism is what it needs to be, in the place where it needs to be, doing what it needs to do. The story is the story of that sufficiency, and it is complete. You think about the fossils you have seen in museums and field sites and the pages of scientific papers, the trilobites in their limestone matrices, the brachiopods with their distinctive ribs, the nautiloid shells with their elegant septal patterns. They seemed, in those contexts, like remnants of something lost, evidence of a world that no longer exists, preserved by geological accident for the benefit of human knowledge. But you are here now in the living version of that world, and the fossils are not remnants of it. They are the same organisms, the same community, the same ocean, experienced from a different position in time. The fossil is the Ordovician viewed from 460 million years later. The experience you're having now is the same thing viewed from within. Neither perspective is more real than the other. The fossil has been transformed by time and pressure and chemistry, but it is still the organism. The organism is alive and unaware that it will become a fossil, but it is already the thing that the fossil will be. Both the fossil and the living organism are equally real aspects of the same entity extended through time, and the geological record that connects them is not a gap to be mourned, but a bridge. Imperfect, partial, incomplete, but genuine, across which information passes from a living world to a knowing one. The morning sun is fully up now, the light no longer at the shallow angle of dawn but risen to a position that sends clear rays down through the surface of the ocean, illuminating the upper water column to a depth of many meters. The phytoplankton are photosynthesizing at full capacity. The reef below is visible as a darkening of the seafloor, a change in the texture of the bottom visible even from the surface through the clear tropical water. The trilobites are too small to see from here, but you know they are there. You know they are there because you have spent a night with this ocean, a night and a day and another morning, and the knowledge of their presence is not abstract anymore. It is not the knowledge of something you have read about or been told about or inferred from fossil evidence. It is the knowledge of something you have witnessed, something that was present with you in the dark water and the warm water and the filtered light of the deep zone and the brilliant light of the surface. The knowledge is embodied, specific, personal as knowledge of a place you have actually inhabited, as specific as the memory of a particular afternoon in a particular light. The Ordovician is not a dead world. It never was. It is an alive world at a different point in time, as real and complete in its aliveness as the modern world, as full of organisms going about their sufficient business as any ecosystem that has ever existed. The fact that it is 460 million years ago does not make it less real. The fact that it will end, that the extinction is coming, that the world you know emerged from the wreckage of this one, none of that makes it less real. It is here, it is now, for as long as you can hold the now of it. And the brachiopods on the reef are filtering the water, and the trilobites are crossing the sediment, and the graptolites are drifting in the current, and the nautiloid is hunting in the clear morning water above the reef, and everything is proceeding in exactly the way that everything has always proceeded in this ocean, without urgency, without drama, without any awareness of the deep future that is being assembled, grain by grain and shell by shell, from the material of their lives. Let the morning hold you. Let the tropical warmth do its work. There is more of this world to see, and the day is young, and the current has nowhere particular to take you, and no particular hurry in the taking. The Ordovician Ocean does not rush. It is one of the oldest things in the world, which is to say it is deeply practiced in the art of not rushing, in the art of arriving at each moment exactly when that moment is, in the art of being entirely present in a present that is 45 million years long. Rest on the surface. The waves carry you gently. The sun warms the water beneath you. The invisible life of the ocean continues in every direction, down through the water column to the darkness of the deep sea floor, outward across the continental shelf to the edge of the reef and beyond, northward to where the water is slightly cooler and the graptolite fauna is already slightly different, southward where the first whispers of the approaching glaciation are beginning, very faintly and very slowly to reach even these warm tropical waters with their thin thread of coolness. The limestone that will eventually be quarried from this former seafloor will be used for many things in the worlds that come after the Ordovician. Some of it will become the foundations of buildings in cities that do not yet exist. Some of it will be crushed and added to road surfaces. Some of it will be burned in kilns to produce quicklime for agriculture and construction. Some of it, the best preserved, most aesthetically interesting portions, will be cut and polished and sold as decorative stone, its surface revealing the cross-sections of crinoid stems and brachiopod shells, and the occasional trilobite in the matrix, fossils visible to any eye that knows what to look for. And some of it will be studied, carefully, systematically, with modern analytical instruments that can extract from the stone information about the chemistry of the ocean that produced it, the temperature of the water, the rate at which the sediment accumulated, the ecological relationships between the organisms whose remains it contains. From these studies, the world that you are currently visiting has been reconstructed, imperfectly, but genuinely. The researchers who have spent careers working on Ordovician stratigraphy and paleontology have built up from the evidence in the rock a picture of this ocean that is not so different from what you are seeing. They have never seen it, of course. They have seen the evidence it left behind, and from that evidence they have used the tools of inference and analogy and physical modelling to reconstruct what the living version must have looked like. The trilobites they have studied were dead before the first human being existed. The brachiopods they have classified were filter feeding in this water hundreds of millions of years before the first human mind formed the concept of classification. The reconstruction that their work has produced is an act of imaginative inference on a geological scale, a genuinely scientific act, constrained and disciplined by evidence, but requiring at every step the contribution of a human mind that can imagine what the evidence implies about a world it has never directly experienced. You are here providing that direct experience to yourself, which is to say that you are doing with the tools of imagination what the paleontologist does with the tools of science, constructing a present tense reality from the available evidence and the capacity to inhabit it imaginatively. Both methods are valid. Both produce something real. The paleontologist's reconstruction is disciplined by evidence in a way that the imaginative visit is not, but the imaginative visit achieves a kind of presence that the scientific reconstruction cannot quite reach, the presence of actually being in a place, of feeling the water around you, of watching the trilobite cross the sediment in real time rather than inferring its movement from the trace fossils it will one day leave. Between these two modes of knowing, the evidential and the experiential, the Ordovician ocean becomes more knowable than either mode alone could make it. The science tells you what was there. The imagination tells you what it was like to be there. Both are partial, both are real, and in the space between them something like understanding becomes possible, not complete understanding, not the understanding of someone who actually lived in the Ordovician, but the understanding available to a mind that has taken both the evidence and the imagination seriously, and let them work on each other until the result is something more than either would have produced alone. The afternoon settles over the Ordovician ocean with the unhurried authority of a season rather than a time of day. The sun has moved west and the light comes across the water at that particular angle that belongs only to the middle of the afternoon, warm and slightly golden, not the brilliant directness of noon, not the orange softness of late afternoon, but something in between that has no precise name in any language, but that any being capable of noticing light would recognize as that time, the time when the day has committed itself to its course, and the evening is still hours away and there is nothing to do but be in it. You have been in this ocean for a long time now. The measure of that time is not hours. The Ordovician does not have hours in the sense you know, and you have not been wearing a watch, and the sun has moved across the sky in ways that would correspond to some number of hours if you were counting. But you have not been counting, you have been watching, and in the watching, time has become something different from what it usually is. Less sequential, less pressured, more like a quality of the water than a quantity to be tracked. The afternoon is not something you are moving through toward an evening. It is something you are inhabiting, and it is sufficient in itself. The trilobites are still on the seafloor. Of course they are. You knew they would be. You did not expect otherwise. But there is something reassuring about descending again through the water column and finding them exactly where you left them, or finding other trilobites of the same species in the same locations, performing the same careful traversals of the same terrain. Reassuring in the way that constancy is always reassuring. The world is doing what the world does, and you can rely on it. This particular trilobite, not the specific individual you observed in the morning, but one indistinguishable from it in every way that matters, has stopped at the edge of a large stromatoporoid mound. It has enrolled, not because of any immediate threat that you can detect, but perhaps because of some chemical signal in the water, some vibration in the substrate, some input to its sensory system that you cannot access. It rests in its enrolled posture, a smooth calcite sphere on the seafloor, and the afternoon current passes over it as it passes over the stromatoporoid mound beside it, and there is no urgency in any of this, no tension, no drama, just an animal doing what it has evolved to do in response to the conditions of its world. You settle to the seafloor level and watch it. The waiting does not feel like waiting because the trilobite is not waiting. It is simply in a particular configuration, a defensive configuration, and will return to its mobile configuration when the conditions that triggered the defense have sufficiently dissipated. The time this takes is not long and not short. It is exactly as long as it takes, which is a different kind of relationship to time than the one you are accustomed to, and a not unpleasant one. The afternoon light on the seafloor is gentler than the morning light. The sun is at a lower angle again, and the light that reaches this depth has passed through more water and been scattered more by the particles in the water column, and arrives here as a diffuse, even illumination that has no strong directionality, no sharp shadows. The reef structure to your right is illuminated from slightly above and to the west, and in this light the textured surface of the stromatoporoid mounds has a warmth to it, not the warmth of temperature, which at this depth is constant and cool, but a visual warmth, a richness of tone that the even midday light did not produce. Something small moves across the surface of the stromatoporoid mound near the enrolled trilobite. It is another trilobite, this one quite small, a juvenile perhaps, though estimating the age of an Ordovician trilobite from its size is not a reliable method. It is navigating the irregular surface of the stromatoporoid with a careful, deliberate step, placing each of its many legs with what looks like consideration, though consideration is not the right word for what is happening neurologically. It is simply responding to the tactile information from each leg contact with the surface, adjusting the placement of the next leg accordingly, in a feedback loop that produces locomotion across terrain that would be challenging for a less articulated creature. The enrolled trilobite unenrolls. It happens in stages, the pygidium first, dropping away from the cephalon, then the thoracic segments straightening one by one, then a brief pause with the body fully extended as the animal takes stock of the environment. The antennae sweep forward, the legs begin to move, the trilobite continues in the direction it was moving before it enrolled, past the stromatoporoid mound and into the open sediment plain beyond, where the afternoon light falls across the surface in its gentle, even way, and the sediment lies undisturbed except by the passage of organisms like this one. The crinoid forest is still waving. It will always be waving. That is the nature of crinoids, of sessile filter feeders in moving water, to wave. The current provides their food, and their wave is the evidence of their feeding, and the two things are inseparable, and the wave is as permanent as the current that produces it. Watching the crinoids wave in the afternoon light is one of the most purely restful things in this ocean, which is a world that contains an extraordinary number of restful things. The rhythm of it is too slow to count, too slow to track as a rhythm in the way that music has a rhythm, but present as a quality, a slow, even, unhurried quality that belongs to this forest and to this water and to this afternoon. A brachiopod near you opens its valves slightly wider than usual. The movement is almost invisible, a matter of millimeters, a change in the gape of the shell that would require careful observation to notice. But it is there, a response to some change in the water chemistry or the current or the concentration of food particles, a behavioral adjustment made automatically by an organism that has no concept of adjusting its behavior, that simply opens a little more when the conditions that support being open a little more are present. The organism is in dialogue with its environment in a language that has no words, that consists entirely of physiological states responding to physical and chemical conditions, and the dialogue is continuous and complete, and goes on every moment of this organism's life without any awareness that it is happening. You are in dialogue with your environment too, of course. Your body is maintaining its temperature, its blood chemistry, its respiratory rhythms in response to the conditions around you. Or it would be, if you were here physically, if the physics of your body were engaged with the physics of this water in the way that the Brachiopod's biology is engaged with it. But you are here in some other way, and the dialogue you are having with the Ordovician Ocean is the dialogue of observation and presence, the dialogue of a mind attending to a world and finding the world sufficient, finding it more than sufficient, finding it exactly what it is, which is an enormous and patient and living thing that has been going about its business for millions of years and will continue for millions more. The afternoon continues. The sun moves toward the western horizon without hurry. The water temperature in the shallows is slightly warmer than it was in the morning, the sun's energy having accumulated over the day in the upper few meters of the water column, and the phytoplankton there are at the peak of their daily photosynthetic rate, producing oxygen in quantities that bubble briefly at the very surface before dissolving back into the water. The zooplankton have settled into their daytime distribution, concentrated in the upper water column, feeding on the phytoplankton with the efficient, continuous motion of small organisms that have no other purpose in life than to feed and to be fed upon, and, occasionally, to reproduce. The nautiloid that you saw this morning, or one of its kind, indistinguishable from the first, passes through the water column above you, moving more slowly than it did earlier, its siphon pumping at a reduced rate, descending gradually toward the sediment level, where it will spend the deeper part of the afternoon before the evening's hunting begins again. It passes through a beam of light that has been filtered through the surface and scattered by particles in the water, and in that beam its shell has a quality of illumination that seems almost deliberate, almost theatrical, though nothing in this ocean has ever produced a theatrical effect intentionally, and nothing in this ocean has an audience capable of appreciating one. You appreciate it. That is what you are here for, in some sense. Not to intervene, not to study, not to collect specimens or record data, but simply to appreciate. To be present in a world that existed before appreciation was possible, and that will have no awareness of the appreciation being directed at it, and to find that presence meaningful in whatever way meaning is available to you here. The appreciation is real. The meaning is real. The world that is being appreciated is real. These three facts coexist without any contradiction, and their coexistence is one of the things that makes this particular afternoon in the Ordovician one of the oldest and newest things you have ever experienced. Let the afternoon hold you. Let the crinoids wave and the trilobites cross the sediment, and the nautiloid descend toward the bottom with its slow, certain authority. Let the brachiopods filter and the stromatoporoids grow, and the graptolites drift in whatever current has them. Let the phytoplankton photosynthesize and the zooplankton feed, and the soft-bodied unknown move through the water in their invisible way. Let all of it be exactly what it is, in all of its specificity and all of its strangeness and all of its deep, patient, irreducible reality. The sun is touching the western horizon now. The light on the ocean surface has turned orange, the long wavelengths surviving the extreme angle of refraction through the atmosphere better than the shorter ones, and the ocean surface is gilded with it, each wave crest catching the orange light and scattering it across the water in a display that is not appreciating itself and does not need to be appreciated, and is happening anyway, exactly as it has always happened, exactly as it will continue to happen, for billions more years, until the sun itself grows too large and too hot for this ocean to exist. But not yet. The sun sets on the Ordovician Ocean with the same unhurried grace with which it has done everything else today, and the last light catches the uppermost arms of the crinoid forest and illuminates the seaward face of the stromatoporoid reef for one long golden moment, and then it is gone, and the evening is here, and the bioluminescence is beginning again in the darkened water, and the world continues as it has always continued, full of lives that need no permission and no witness, full of processes that are complete in themselves, full of an ancient and patient and absolute indifference to anything except the business of being alive. The afternoon has a quality of permanence that the morning lacks. The morning is all becoming. It is the world arriving at itself, the light increasing, the temperature rising, the organisms of the upper water column taking up their daytime positions. The afternoon is the world having arrived, the light steady, the temperature at its daily peak, the organisms settled into their productive routines, everything in the configuration that the morning was preparing it to achieve. There is a completeness to the afternoon that the morning, by virtue of its direction and momentum, cannot quite reach. This is one of the subtler pleasures of being in the Ordovician at this hour. The afternoon does not ask you to anticipate the evening. It does not remind you that the day is passing. It is simply the middle of things, as it has been the middle of things on this particular patch of ocean for millions of years, as it will be the middle of things for millions of years more. The stromatoporoids are building in the afternoon as they build in the morning. The trilobites are crossing the sediment in the afternoon as they cross it at all times. The graptolites are drifting. The brachiopods are filtering. The afternoon is not a stage between morning and evening. It is a state complete in itself that the ocean inhabits with full commitment. Watch the way the light falls across the crinoid forest at this hour. The angle is lower than noon, lower than morning, and the shadows that the even diffuse illumination of the deep zones cannot quite suppress are beginning to appear. Not strong shadows, not the definite shadows of a bright noonday sun on land, but a slight directionality to the light that distinguishes the side of a crinoid stalk facing west from the side facing east, that catches the upper surfaces of the brachiopod shells and illuminates them slightly more than the lower surfaces. The afternoon light adds a dimensionality to the seafloor that the noon light lacked, and the seafloor responds by becoming, for a few hours, even more visually interesting than it was. Not that the crinoids care about this. Not that the brachiopods experience the afternoon light as more beautiful than the noon light. These organisms do not have the neural machinery for aesthetic experience, and even if they did, the relevant wavelengths of light at this depth are different from the wavelengths that produce aesthetic responses in human visual systems. What you see as a warm afternoon glow is not what any organism on this seafloor sees, because none of them sees in quite the way that you see. The beauty of the afternoon is yours, produced by the interaction of this particular light with your particular visual system and the associations that system has accumulated over the course of your lifetime. The Ordovician offers the raw material, you complete the experience. This seems important to acknowledge. The beauty is real. It is a real response of a real observing mind to real stimuli. But the beauty is also created, in the moment of observation, by the observer. The Ordovician seafloor does not possess beauty the way it possesses calcium carbonate or brachiopods. The beauty is something that happens in the encounter between the world and the mind that meets it, and without the mind, the encounter does not produce beauty. Without the world, it produces nothing at all. The afternoon requires both things, the light and the eye that receives it, and when both are present, the experience that results is one of the small proofs that consciousness, however improbable, is worth having. If you have found yourself drifting, if the boundary between the Ordovician ocean and the place where you're lying has softened until the two feel continuous, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. There is a moment in every long descent, and this has been a long descent into deep time and deep water and the deep patient world of the Ordovician, when the direction changes, not dramatically, not with any announcement. Simply a shift in orientation, a turning, and suddenly you are ascending even though you do not remember deciding to ascend, moving upward through layers of experience and depth and time the way you moved downward through them, each layer slightly different from the one before it, each one releasing you gently into the next. The seafloor recedes below you. The crinoids become smaller with distance, then too small to distinguish as individuals, then lost in the general texture of the bottom. The stromatoporoid reef is a darkening of the seafloor below you, visible for a while as you rise, then blurring into the visual noise of the deeper water. The trilobites were never visible from this height, and their invisibility now is no different from their invisibility all along at this scale. They are there. They are always there, moving across the sediment with their compound eyes and their enrolled defences and their methodical search for food. But the distance from which they can be perceived as individuals is much shorter than the distance at which the overall features of the seafloor are visible. The graptolites appear again as you move through the middle water column. The same species you saw on the way down, the same pale trailing colonies drifting in the current, the same slow rotation on their axes as the water moves around them. They have not changed. Of course they have not changed. You have been in this ocean for what might be a day and a night in experiential time, and a day and a night is nothing in the life of a graptolite colony that lives for months or years before dying and sinking to the seafloor to become part of the sediment record. They are exactly as they were, and their constancy is one more expression of the Ordovician's deep patience. The light above is brightening as you ascend. This is the second morning you have seen in this ocean, or perhaps it is only the first morning seen from a different angle, the approach from below rather than the arrival from above. Either way, the light is the same light. The tropical Ordovician sun, filtered through the surface of the sea, transformed from the direct white light of atmosphere into the diffuse, shifting, blue-green illumination of the water column. You have seen this light before, and it greets you now with a familiarity that is pleasant. What do you take with you from this place? Not specimens. There is nothing to carry out of the Ordovician, no shells to pocket, no photographs to take. Not specific knowledge in the scientific sense. The knowledge of the organisms you have observed was present before you arrived, assembled from the fossil record and the theoretical models of Ordovician paleontologists. What you take is something less concrete and perhaps more durable. The experience of having been in a world that was complete before your arrival and will be complete after your departure. A world that asked nothing of you and gave you everything it had. A world so old and so patient and so indifferent to your presence that it somehow became the most welcoming place you have ever been. The ocean you inhabit now, the ocean of the present moment, wherever you are lying or sitting or half asleep in the dark of your own room, contains, somewhere in its depths, the limestone that was once the reef you visited. Not the same ocean, not in any simple geographical sense. The continents have moved, the seafloors have been subducted and recycled, the water itself has cycled through evaporation and precipitation, and river flow and ocean basin 1,000 times. but the molecules that compose the modern ocean include some that were once part of the Ordovician ocean, drifting in this ancient tropical water, carrying dissolved calcium and carbon and sulfate and chloride through the bodies of the creatures you have spent this long day and night observing. The water itself remembers, in the sense that water always carries the chemical signature of its history, even when that signature is diluted beyond practical detection. The oxygen you breathe, the oxygen in your lungs right now, in this moment, wherever you are, includes oxygen atoms that were produced by Ordovician phytoplankton 460 million years ago, and have cycled through the atmosphere and the ocean and the bodies of organisms countless times since. You're breathing the Ordovician. You have always been breathing it. Every breath is a small contact with the deep past of this planet, every molecule of oxygen a gift from organisms that did not know they were giving anything. The surface approaches. The light above is the full tropical morning again, the sun clear above the surface, the water column illuminated from above in the way it was when you first arrived in this ocean. The quality of this light, so different from the quality of the bioluminescent night, so different from the quality of the deep water below, is the quality of beginning. The light that was there when you first arrived, the light that will be there when you leave, the light that this ocean has been producing with the help of its phytoplankton since long before this particular morning and will continue to produce for millions of mornings after this one. You rise, the surface approaches, the boundary between the water and the air above it becomes visible as a shimmer, a distinct line, a threshold that the light marks clearly. Below you, the Ordovician ocean goes about its business. The Trilobites crossing the sediment, the Brachiopods filtering the water, the crinoids waving in the current, the nautiloids hunting in the water column, the graptolites drifting, the soft-bodied unknown moving through the dark in ways that leave no record. All of it continues. All of it was continuing before you arrived and will continue after you are gone. You're almost at the surface. The water around you is very bright, the light clear and strong, and the world above the surface, the Ordovician sky with its simple blue and the bare shore of a continent without trees or grass or any life that stands above the ground, is visible through the shimmer as a pale suggestion of what awaits on the other side of the boundary. It is a different world up there, simpler and less inhabited than the world you have been moving through below the surface, and you are moving toward it, rising through the last meters of water with a gradual inevitability that feels less like departure than like completion. Something passes below you as you rise, not a large nautiloid, not a threat, just the shadow of something moving through the middle water column in the opposite direction to your ascent, descending as you rise, going deeper as you come up. You do not stop to watch it. It is part of the ongoing business of this ocean, as you have been, briefly, a part of that business, and both of you are moving in the directions that your respective natures require. The ocean accommodates all of this without effort. It always has. The surface breaks, or you break the surface, or the surface simply ceases to be a barrier as you move through it, the distinction between inside and outside dissolving as gradually as everything else in this place dissolves. You are above the water now. The air is warm and smells of salt. The horizon of the Ordovician ocean extends in every direction, uninterrupted, unmarked by any human structure or activity. The waves roll in from the east with their gentle persistence. The sun is exactly where it should be. Below you, barely visible through the clear tropical water, the reef is going about its affairs. The stromatoporoids are growing, as they have been growing all day, all night, all year, all the millions of years of this reef's history. The brachiopods are filtering. The trilobites are crossing the sediment. The graptolites are drifting in the current that runs along the reef edge, carrying them in their slow, aimless, perfect way from one point to another, producing no record of their passage except the thin organic films that will one day become the black shale of an Ordovician graptolite bed in a country that does not yet exist. You let the water hold you. You let the morning sun warm the surface around you. You let the waves carry you in their gentle rhythm, eastward and westward and eastward again, the energy of the swell moving through the water under you in a pattern that is regular without being mechanical, alive without being aware, ancient without being static. The Ordovician ocean rocks you on its surface as it has rocked every particle of water on its surface for the entirety of its existence, and the rocking is slow and even and asks nothing of you except that you allow it. Let it carry you. Let the warm water take your weight. Let the sound of the waves, that old, patient sound, the sound that is older than any music, and that does not know it is beautiful and does not need to know, be the last thing you hear from this place. The trilobites are below you in the dark of the water, moving across their ancient sediment. The nautiloids are below you, adjusting their buoyancy with the precision of creatures that have had hundreds of millions of years to perfect that adjustment. The graptolites are drifting. The reef is building, stone by stone, shell by shell, colony by colony, in the slow and patient way that reefs have always built themselves. Everything is here. Everything is continuing. You are part of it briefly, and then you are not, and the ocean continues exactly as it would have continued whether you had been here or not. And this is not a diminishment. This is the world doing what the world does, which is to continue, which is to be exactly and completely itself, without any need for observation or appreciation or memory. The Ordovician ocean does not need you to remember it. It is enough that it was here. It is enough that it was real. It is enough that it was alive in all its improbable, patient, ancient, indifferent aliveness, long before the first creature ever looked up and wondered what the stars were. The ascent through the water column is a recapitulation. Each zone you pass through on the way up is a zone you pass through on the way down, and you recognize it, not just intellectually, but in the way you recognize a road you have travelled before, the way that familiarity settles into the body as a kind of comfort rather than a kind of boredom. You've been in this water. It knows your passage in whatever minimal sense water can know anything, by the slight disturbance you make in it, and you know the water by the accumulated experience of your time within it. The graptolites at this level are the same graptolites, or rather, they are the same colonies, the same species, possibly even the same individual organisms, since the time you've spent in this ocean is short on any scale that matters to a graptolite colony with a lifespan of months or years. They are doing exactly what they were doing when you first passed through this level on the way down, hanging in the current, extending their zooid tentacles, intercepting whatever food particles the slow water carries past them. They do not know you are ascending. They do not know you were ever here. The not knowing is not a failure of the graptolites. It is simply the reality of their existence, which is calibrated to a different set of inputs and concerns than your existence is calibrated to. They are organisms of chemistry and current, not of narrative and memory. The story you're telling yourself about being in this ocean, the story that has a beginning when you descended, and a middle when you explored the seafloor and the water column and the surface, and an ending, which is approaching now as you rise, is a story that exists only in your mind. The graptolites are not characters in it. They are simply themselves, in their own moment, which is not narrative and not a story, and does not require an observer to be real. And yet you have been observing, and the observation has been real, and whatever you carry out of this ocean with you, the images, the feelings, the sense of having been in a place and a time that precedes your own existence by an incomprehensible margin, those things are also real. The experience of visiting the Ordovician, even in this way, has changed something in your relationship to the present moment, to the ground beneath your feet, to the water that falls from the sky, to the calcium that moves through your body and will one day be returned to the earth. You have been here in the most genuine way that here is available to a human mind, and the here you have been in is 460 million years deep. That depth is not an abstraction. It is a real depth, as real as the depth of the water column you're ascending through right now, and it extends in a direction that is perpendicular to the directions you normally move through. Not up or down, not east or west, but into the past, into the accumulation of time that underlies every present moment, like the geological strata that underlie the soil. You are standing always on top of that accumulation. You have always been standing on it. You simply did not know until now what some of the layers contain. There is a word in geology, stasis, that refers to periods in the fossil record when the morphology of species does not change appreciably over long intervals of time. Stasis does not mean nothing is happening. It means that the evolutionary changes that are happening, and they are always happening, at the level of population genetics, at the level of individual variation within species, are not producing net directional change in the average morphology of the lineage. The organism is not getting bigger or smaller, not developing new structures or losing old ones. It is, in the most technical sense, staying the same. The trilobite lineages of the Ordovician have been in various states of stasis and change throughout the period. The early Ordovician saw considerable innovation, new body plans appearing, new ecological strategies being explored, the trilobite fauna diversifying into the many forms that now populate this seafloor. But the trilobite you watched cross the sediment this morning is not dramatically different from the trilobites that were crossing the sediment 20 million years ago, and the trilobites 20 million years from now, those that survived the approaching extinction, will not be dramatically different from this one. They have found, these creatures, a body plan that works in this environment, and they are expressing that plan with the fidelity that natural selection maintains when a design is doing its job. The brachiopods are similar. The basic brachiopod body plan, 2 valves, lophophore, pedicle or byssus for attachment, was established long before the Ordovician, and it will persist in various modifications and elaborations for another 400 million years after the Ordovician ends. Some brachiopod species alive today are so similar in their external morphology to their Ordovician ancestors that a non-specialist might not notice the difference. The linguid brachiopods, a group represented on modern beaches and in modern tide pools, are sometimes called living fossils precisely because their shells look so much like the linguid brachiopods of the Ordovician. They have been doing the same thing in the same way for 500 million years. What does it mean for a design to be so successful that it persists without fundamental modification for 500 million years? It does not mean the design is perfect in some absolute sense. There is no perfect design, no final solution to the problem of being a brachiopod in the ocean. It means the design is sufficiently good, sufficiently matched to a sufficiently stable set of environmental conditions, that the variations from it that arise through mutation and genetic drift do not, on average, survive as well as the design itself. The design is maintained by selection, not because selection has a goal or a preference, but because the alternatives that arise are, on average, worse at doing what the design does. This is the deep grammar of evolution, visible everywhere in the Ordovician ocean if you know how to read it. Every organism around you is the current expression of a lineage that has been tested by selection for millions of generations, and the features that define that organism, the compound eyes of the trilobite, the lophophore of the brachiopod, the chambered shell of the nautiloid, the colonial structure of the graptolite, are features that have been retained because their retention, generation after generation, has resulted in more surviving offspring than their absence or modification would have produced. The organisms around you are not here by accident. They are here because their ancestors succeeded at surviving and reproducing in conditions like these, and because the features that contributed to that success have been passed on and maintained. The approaching extinction does not negate this. The features that make these organisms successful in the Ordovician Ocean are not the same features that will be required for survival in the cold, oxygen-poor, chemically altered ocean that the glaciation will produce. The trilobite's compound eyes and its enrolled defense are exquisite solutions to the problem of being a trilobite in a warm, productive Ordovician shelf environment. They are not solutions to the problem of being an organism in a world where the temperature has dropped by 10 degrees, and the water chemistry has changed, and the food chains have been disrupted by the loss of the primary producers that support them. The extinction does not reveal a flaw in the trilobite's design. It reveals a change in the conditions that the design was built for. And yet some will survive. The trilobite lineage will persist through the Ordovician Silurian extinction, reduced but not eliminated, and the survivors will be the ones whose particular combination of features, perhaps a slightly higher tolerance for cold water, perhaps a slightly more flexible diet, perhaps a slightly more effective burrowing behaviour that allows deeper concealment in the sediment during the worst periods of the extinction, allows them to maintain a reproducing population through the interval of crisis. They will not know they have survived. They will simply be alive on the far side of a geological boundary, in a different ocean, in a different world, carrying the essential character of the trilobite body plan into a future that their ancestors did not live to see. The reef below you is at the peak of its diversity. The stromatoporoid mounds are at their largest. The brachiopod beds are at their densest. The trilobite fauna is at its most varied. If you could survey the entire Ordovician shelf system at this moment, not just this one patch of tropical water, but the entire global extent of the warm, productive shallow seas that cover the continental margins in this geological period, you would find a diversity of life that rivals or exceeds any subsequent period in Earth's history in terms of the number of distinct marine invertebrate species present. The Ordovician is the peak. This is, in some meaningful sense, the high tide of marine invertebrate diversification in the history of the planet. The high tide does not know it is the high tide. The reef does not know it is at the apex of its complexity. The trilobites do not know that their lineage is at its greatest diversity. Everything simply continues, and the continuation is the expression of the fullness. The fullness is not a state that exists separately from the continuing, it is the continuing itself, the ongoing process of organisms being what they are in the world that they have. Let this settle into you. The fullness of the Ordovician Ocean is not a feeling or a judgment, it is a fact about the number of species, the density of organisms, the complexity of ecological relationships, the productivity of the biological machinery that converts sunlight and dissolved minerals into the living matter of this extraordinary world. And you are here in it, floating in the middle of the high tide, watching the trilobites cross the sediment, and the crinoids wave in the current, and the nautiloid descend through the water column with its slow authority, and the knowledge that this is the peak of something makes it neither more beautiful nor less beautiful than it would be without that knowledge. It makes it more fully known. That is what the knowledge does. Not adds beauty, not adds meaning, but adds specificity to the experience, sharpens it, gives it the precision of something that is not just beautiful in a general way, but beautiful in this particular way, at this particular moment, in this particular ocean, at the particular height of this particular wave, in the history of life on this planet. The specificity is everything. The Ordovician is not a symbol of something else. It is not a metaphor. It is the thing itself, specific and real and temporary and full, and you are here in it, specific and real and temporary and as full as the world allows you to be. The afternoon is ending. The light above the surface is deepening toward evening, the warmth of it becoming the warmth of an afternoon that has lasted as long as an afternoon can last, that is becoming something else without hurry or drama, simply by the passage of time and the movement of the sun. The stromatoporoids are still building, the brachiopods are still filtering, the trilobites are still crossing the sediment, the graptolites are still drifting in the current, the nautiloids are still hunting, everything is still continuing, everything will continue. And you can rest now. You have been in this ocean long enough to know it, not to know everything about it, not to have seen every creature or understood every process, but to have been genuinely present in it for long enough that it has become real to you in the way that places become real when you inhabit them, rather than merely visit them. You have floated above the seafloor and watched the trilobites. You have drifted in the water column with the graptolites. You have seen the nautiloid hunt and the reef build and the deep darkness with its bioluminescence and the surface with its morning light and its tropical warmth and its gentle, unhurried waves. You have been here. That is the only thing you are asked to do, and you have done it, and it is complete. The evening comes. The bioluminescence returns to the deep water, the cold sparks of 1 billion bacteria going about their ancient chemistry in the darkness below. The surface cools slightly. The zooplankton begin their downward migration for the night. The nautiloids adjust their buoyancy. The trilobites continue across the sediment in the dark, as they have continued in every previous dark and will continue in every subsequent one, for as long as the Ordovician lasts and for as long as the lineage carries the memory of this body plan forward into the future that is slowly, geologically being assembled from the material of this moment. Sleep now. The ocean will still be here. It always is. It was here before you arrived, and it will be here after you leave, and in between it will go on being exactly what it is, which is one of the oldest and most patient and most complete things that has ever existed on the surface of this planet. Let it hold you. Let the ancient water do what ancient water has always done. Let the trilobites cross their sediment, and the crinoids wave in their current, and the graptolites drift in their slow colonial silence. Let all of it be, exactly as it is, in the oldest ocean of your imagination, in the deepest time your mind can touch. There is something in the stillness of this hour that you have not noticed until now, because it requires a certain kind of quietness in yourself to perceive it. The ocean at the end of the Ordovician afternoon is not merely still, it is settled. It has found, after 445 million years of becoming, a kind of equilibrium between all the forces that have shaped it. The calcium carbonate chemistry is balanced. The temperature gradients between surface and depth are gradual and predictable. The circulation of nutrients from the seafloor to the photic zone and back again follows paths that have been carved by long use into the fabric of the water itself. Nothing is straining. Nothing is in excess. Everything is, for this moment, precisely as much as it needs to be. You understand something now that you could not have understood when you first arrived. The Ordovician ocean did not need you to witness it. It was complete without you, exactly as it is complete after you leave. But the witnessing has done something to you, not to the ocean. It has given you access, however briefly, to a patience that is not human in its scale, a silence that is not the absence of sound but the presence of time so vast that sound becomes a small and temporary perturbation within it. You have been in the older silence. You are carrying some of it back with you now, into the small and temporary hour of your sleeping. The crinoids have not moved, in the way that crinoids do not move, which is to say they have moved continuously, every feather arm adjusting its angle to the current by micrometers, every tube foot extending and retracting in the rhythm of feeding, the whole colony alive and processing and being exactly what it is without pause or hesitation. But to you, floating above them in the deepening evening light, they appear motionless. They appear to have always been here, and to intend to remain here for as long as the word here has meaning. This is one of the gifts of the Ordovician. Everything in it appears permanent from the outside, even though from the inside it is all in constant motion, all in process, all in the act of being alive. Let that be true of you as well now, in this hour. From the outside, from the perspective of the ancient water that holds you, you may appear still. You may appear settled. You may appear to have found the equilibrium that the Ordovician ocean found over its long centuries of becoming. And perhaps, for this moment, that appearance and the reality beneath it are not as far apart as they usually are. Perhaps the stillness of this ocean, borrowed for the length of an evening, is something you can keep for the length of a night. The Trilobite has stopped, not in response to you. It stopped because it found what it was looking for, or because the signal that was driving it forward has resolved into something quieter, or simply because this is where it has arrived and this is where it will remain for the duration of the night. It rests on the sediment, its legs folded beneath its calcite shell, its compound eyes still receiving whatever light remains in the water. It is not sleeping exactly. Trilobites do not sleep in the way that you sleep, but it is resting. It is at the end of its day's work, still and complete in the ancient way that things become complete when they have simply continued long enough. You have continued long enough tonight. The Ordovician has given you what it had to give. Not information, though there has been much of that, and not beauty, though there has been much of that as well, but something older and simpler than either. It has given you duration, the experience of having been somewhere for long enough that it became real. Real in the way that only time can make things real. Not real because you thought hard about it or concentrated carefully on it, but real because you were present in it through the full arc of a day, from the first cool light of the Ordovician morning to this last softening of the Ordovician evening, and the duration of that presence has made the ocean as familiar to you as the spaces where you usually spend your time. Familiarity is the deepest form of rest, to be somewhere known, to be in the presence of things that have become, through repetition and duration, predictable in the way that the sea is predictable, always moving, always changing, but always within the range of what the sea does, always recognizable as sea. The Ordovician ocean is now, after this long day, predictable to you in this way. You know its creatures, you know its rhythms, you know the quality of its light at different depths and different hours. You know the feel of its water and the patterns of its current. It is your ocean now for the length of this night, and you can sleep in it as you would sleep in any place that has become familiar through the patient accumulation of hours. You are back now, or you are still there. The distinction has softened considerably, and perhaps that is the point, that the Ordovician ocean and the place where you are resting are not as separate as they seemed when you first descended. The ancient sea is in the water that makes up most of your body. The oxygen that moves through your blood was produced by organisms not so different from the phytoplankton you observed in the warm surface waters 460 million years ago. The calcium in your bones is the same calcium that the brachiopods and trilobites and stromatoporoids used to build their shells and their skeletons in this same ancient ocean. You carry the Ordovician with you everywhere you go, you always have. You simply did not know it before tonight. Let the memory of the water settle around you, the weight of it, which is no weight, the ancient pressure of the deep zones, which is also a comfort, the slow waving of the crinoid forest, the deliberate, patient progress of the trilobite across the sediment, the nautiloid descending through the water column with its complete and animal certainty, the graptolites drifting in their pale colonial silence. Let these images be the furniture of the space behind your closed eyes. Not vivid, not demanding, just present. The way a quiet room is present when you wake in the night and do not need to look around to know where you are. The room is simply there, known and familiar, and you are in it, and you are safe. The Ordovician Ocean is that room. The crinoids are its furniture. The trilobites are its small, reliable sounds. The bioluminescence of the deep night is its gentle, sourceless light. You have been here, and you know it, and the knowing is enough. Your breathing is slower now. If it was not already slow when the story began, it is slow now. Slow in the way that water slows everything that passes through it. Slow in the way that deep time slows the urgency of any particular moment. Slow in the way of the ocean itself, which breathes in tides and breathes out tides and does not count the breaths. The next breath will come, it always does, and after it, another, and after that, another, in a sequence that does not require your attention or your effort, that simply continues the way the Ordovician Ocean continued, the way the crinoids continued their slow waving, the way the trilobites continued their crossing of the sediment, the way the graptolites continued their drifting, without intention, without effort, without anything required of you except your presence. You are present, that is enough, that has always been enough. The waves of the Ordovician are very far away now, and very close at the same time. The sound of them is inside the sound of your own breathing. The slow rhythm, the measured rise and fall, the patience of something that has been doing this for much longer than you have been listening. Let the two rhythms align. Let your breathing be the breathing of the ancient ocean, slow and salt-flavoured and older than any story you have ever been told. The trilobites are still crossing the sediment. They will be crossing it when you wake. They will be crossing it in the limestone strata that underlie the soil, in places you have walked, and places you have never walked, and places no one has ever walked. They are always there. The Ordovician is always there. Beneath every present moment is a stack of geological time, reaching down through the Silurian and Devonian and Carboniferous, and all the ages of the world to this one, to this warm tropical ocean with its patient builders and its patient hunters and its patient drifters, all of them going about their ancient business in the silence that is not silence, but only the absence of human ears to hear whatever sounds they make. Rest now. Let the water hold you. Let the ancient ocean do what oceans have always done, which is to hold whatever floats on their surface without asking why it is there or how long it plans to stay. You are welcome here. You have always been welcome here. Sleep. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the Ordovician Deep, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It truly helps us continue making more of these stories for you. Anyways, see you in the next one. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you could visit any prehistoric ocean, which one would you choose? The Ordovician, the Devonian, the Cretaceous? Let me know in the comments.